They grabbed her like she was nothing, dragged her through the mud while the whole town watched and said not one word. If you've ever been judged by people who never took the time to know your heart, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. Watch all the way to the end, because what happens in the final minutes will stay with you, and drop a comment right now telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The rope was already around her wrists before most people in Black Pine even stepped outside to see what the commotion was about. Evelyn Carter did not scream. She had learned somewhere in the wreckage of the last 2 years that screaming only gave certain kinds of men satisfaction. So she pressed her lips together, held her chin level, and let her eyes move across the crowd that had gathered along the main road. Neighbors she had cooked for, women whose children she had minded, men whose names she had known since before her hair had gone silver at the temples. Not one of them moved. Harlan Briggs held the rope. He was a big man, barrel-chested, with the kind of face that looked permanently sunburned and permanently irritated, and he had the rope looped through his thick fingers like he was leading livestock to pasture. Behind him stood 4 others: Pete Doyle, who owned the feed store; Cal Rourke, who had a half-interest in the sawmill; 2 ranch hands whose names Evelyn had never bothered to learn because men like them came and went with the seasons. They had come to her door just after supper, and they had not knocked. They had simply walked in. "You know why we're here," Harlan had said, and it was not a question. Evelyn had been standing at the dry sink washing the single tin cup she used every evening, and she had turned around slowly because she had learned that a fast movement would be used against her. "I don't believe I've done anything that merits a visit from 5 men after dark," she said. Harlan smiled, a smile with no warmth anywhere in it. "Mrs. Carter, half the town saw you going through Merritt's supply shed 2 nights ago. You want to tell me what you were looking for in there?" "I was not in Merritt's supply shed." "Half the town says different." "Then half the town is mistaken." That was when Pete Doyle had moved to her side, and Cal Rourke had moved to the door, and the rope had come out from somewhere behind Harlan's back, like it had been waiting there all along. Now she was in the street, and the cold coming off the mountain was the kind that got into your joints and stayed there. And the ground under her boots was half-frozen mud, cracked into sharp ridges, and she stumbled twice as Harlan pulled her forward, and both times she caught herself before she went down, because she refused. She had made herself a promise. She absolutely refused to fall in front of these people. "Where are you taking her?" someone called from the edge of the crowd. A woman's voice. "Outside the settlement line," Harlan said, loud and easy, like he was announcing the weather. "She's been trouble since the day she arrived. We're just doing what the town already decided." "Who decided?" the woman called again. "Everybody reasonable." And that was apparently sufficient, because the murmuring settled, and nobody else spoke, and nobody stepped forward, and Harlan kept walking, and Evelyn kept being pulled. She thought about her husband Thomas. She thought about the way he used to put his hand at the small of her back when they walked into church, that quiet gesture that said without words, "I am here and you are not alone." Thomas had been dead 14 months. The fever had taken him in the span of 8 days, which Evelyn still found impossible to fully comprehend. After Thomas, the creditors had come. After the creditors, the house. After the house, she had come to Black Pine because Thomas had a cousin here named Robert, who had written her a letter saying she was welcome until she found her footing. Robert's wife had other ideas. She had lasted 11 days before the atmosphere became so hostile she had moved herself to Mrs. Donohue's boarding house, taken in mending, to pay her way kept to herself. She had tried with the particular desperation of someone who had already lost everything once, not to need anything from anybody. And still somehow here she was. Rope around her wrists, cold mud under her feet, the whole town watching her go. They had reached the edge of town. The buildings thinned, and the road turned to dirt, and beyond the last fence post, the darkness was complete. Harlan stopped and raised his free hand like a man giving a benediction. "Black Pine is a decent town," he said. "We don't want trouble. We don't want people who bring trouble. Mrs. Carter goes. She doesn't come back, and that's an end to it." A few people nodded. Most just stood there. Evelyn planted her feet. "I want to hear it from the town," she said. Harlan's eyebrows went up. What? You said the community made its decision. I want one person to stand in front of me and say they believe I am what you say I am and that they want me gone. The silence that followed was extraordinary. It rang like something struck. This isn't a trial, Harlan said. No. Evelyn agreed. It isn't. Nobody spoke. She looked at women whose mending she had done, at men who had tipped their hats to her in the street, at faces she had seen across the church aisle on Sundays. The cold was significant now. Her hands had gone numb inside the rope. Nobody spoke. And in the silence, she heard it, two sets of running feet, and then two voices, high and breathless and absolutely certain, cutting through the frozen air like a pair of bells. Stop, she's our family. Stop right now, she's our family. The twins came out of the darkness at a dead run. They were 9 years old, Eli and Clara Walker, and they had the particular quality of children who had been raised with both a great deal of freedom and a great deal of love, which meant they were afraid of very little. Clara hit the edge of the crowd first and went straight through it, elbowing past Pete Doyle and ducking under Cal Rourke's arm without a word of apology, and Eli was half a step behind, and they both came to a stop directly between Evelyn and Harlan Briggs. Clara reached up and grabbed Evelyn's bound wrists with both hands. "Let go of her," Clara said to Harlan. 9 years old, and her voice did not shake. Harlan looked at the child the way a man looks at something mildly absurd. "Get out of the way, little girl." "She's our family," Eli said, positioning himself slightly to Clara's right, looking at Harlan with an expression that was a striking replica of someone much older. "You don't get to drag our family through the street." "Where is your father?" someone in the crowd said. "Right here." The voice came from the back of the crowd, with a quality of quietness that somehow carried farther than Harlan's announcement had. The crowd parted, and Nathan Cole Walker walked through the middle of it. He was lean and dark-haired, and somewhere north of 40, with hands that showed work and a face that showed weather. And he walked at the same pace he probably always walked, even unhurried, and the crowd kept moving out of his way. He stopped beside his children. He looked at Evelyn first, a quick, comprehensive look that took in the rope and the bound wrists and the mud on her dress and the way she was holding herself, and something moved across his face, quick as a shadow, and was gone. Then he looked at Harlan. "Cut that rope," he said. Harlan laughed, short and contemptuous. "Walker, this doesn't concern you. She's standing in front of my children with her hands tied. That makes it my concern." He looked at the rope again. "Cut it. She's been run out by the town." "What town?" Nathan looked at the crowd. "Harlan, I'm looking at maybe 30 people, and I don't see the mayor, I don't see the sheriff. I don't see anyone with legal authority to run anybody anywhere. What I see is you with a rope. What law are you operating under?" Harlan's jaw moved. "Community decision. Communities don't make decisions by letting one man hold a rope. Still even. Still not raised. Cut it." The standoff held for 5 seconds, a long time when 30 people are watching and nobody is speaking. Then Nathan looked past Harlan at Cal Rourke. "Cal, cut the rope." Cal looked at Harlan. Harlan's expression had gone stony. Cal looked back at Nathan, then at the two children standing between a bound woman and the man holding her binding. He reached into his coat, took out his folding knife, and cut the rope. The crowd let out a breath it had apparently been holding. Evelyn's hands came free. Clara was already pulling at the loops around her wrists with quick and competent fingers. Eli had turned to face the crowd with his arms slightly out from his sides, a posture that on a 9-year-old boy was more affecting than he probably knew. "Come with us," Clara said quietly to Evelyn. "Clara," Evelyn began. "Daddy already said." Clara said it in the tone of someone reporting a settled fact. "Come on." Nathan Walker owned a ranch 4 miles up the mountain road. The main house was built from timber that had weathered to gray, and the yard was dirt that in spring turned to mud and in winter turned to iron. Evelyn had passed the road to it a dozen times, but had never had occasion to turn up it. Clara and Eli flanked her on the walk, talking the whole way, not about what had just happened, but about the ranch, about the 2 horses that Eli was convinced were developing opinions about things, about a cat who who had appeared 3 weeks ago, and installed herself in the barn as if she had always lived there. They included her the way children include someone they have decided to welcome without reservation, without the strategic warmth that adults deploy. Inside it was warm. Fire in the hearth lamp on the table, coffee on the stove. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment, adjusting to the light and warmth, and felt something complicated happen behind her sternum. "Sit down," Clara told her with the cheerful authority of a child who sets the social rules of her household. "I'll get you coffee." Nathan had moved to the stove. He set 2 cups on the table and sat across from Evelyn, and the twins, having discharged their immediate obligations, disappeared into another part of the house. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evelyn looked at her hands. The rope marks were red and would be bruised by morning. She put her hands in her lap. "Thank you," she said. "What you did back there, you didn't have to do that." "I know," Nathan said. "You've made an enemy of Harlan Briggs." "Harlan Briggs was already an enemy. I just hadn't needed to make it official." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "He's been in Black Pine 3 years. In those 3 years, 2 homesteaders on the North Road sold their land and left under circumstances that weren't comfortable. A third man, his name was Garrett, held out against Merritt Holt's purchase offers. 6 months later, his barn burned down. His well was contaminated. His wife's health failed fast enough that they couldn't afford the doctor bills and the place at the same time." Nathan paused. "They sold. Garrett's driving a freight wagon in Billings now." Evelyn absorbed this. "You connect Harlan to those events." "I don't have proof. I have enough common sense and proximity to draw conclusions." He looked at her directly. "What do you have? Or what do they think you have?" She studied him. What she read in Nathan Walker was not uncomplicated kindness. It was something more useful. Honesty. He was not telling her she was safe. He was asking her to be straight with him. "My husband's cousin is the county recorder," she said. Nathan nodded slowly. "Robert was frightened when I arrived. He started to say something to me one evening and then stopped himself. 3 days later I moved to Mrs. Donahue's." She paused. "Before I left, Robert pressed something into my hand without a word. Just said to keep it safe and not tell anyone." "What was it?" 4 pages. Records of some kind. Land parcel numbers, name signatures on certain documents that don't match the official recordings in the county register." She held his gaze. "Forged documents." Nathan was quiet. "Whose properties?" "I don't know the full extent, but I think Harlan Briggs or whoever he's working for knows Robert gave me something, and they need to find out what I have before they can feel safe." She paused. "The shed was never about the shed." "No," Nathan said. "It wasn't." He looked at her. "Where are the pages now?" "Sewn into the hem of my coat." Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to it. The look of someone revising an estimate upward. "You had them on you tonight, when they walked you out of town." "I wasn't about to leave them at Mrs. Donahue's." "So, if they'd gotten you past the settlement line?" "They would have searched me eventually." She met his eyes. "Yes." I was quiet for a long time after that. The quiet of someone thinking something all the way through before speaking. "You can stay here," he said finally. "For as long as you need. There's a room at the end of the hall. The door has a good latch." Evelyn opened her mouth. "Before you argue," he said not unkindly, "let me tell you what I see. You have documents that could be evidence of significant fraud. Harlan has just made a public move against you, which means he's feeling pressure. Mrs. Donahue's has about the same security as an open field. And my children have apparently decided you're family." Something in his voice shifted slightly. "Eli and Clara don't make those decisions lightly for whatever that's worth to you." "It's worth something," Evelyn said quietly. More than she could say. She had been in the room at the end of the hall for perhaps 2 hours when she heard it. Not wind. Not the house settling. Footsteps in the hall deliberate slow the specific rhythm of someone moving carefully and trying not to be heard. She was still. She counted the steps. 1 pause, 2 pause, stopping outside her door. The latch moved, firmly. Testing. It held. Then silence. Then the footsteps retreating. She sat without moving and counted to 60 and then 60 more, and then she let out a breath so slow and controlled, it made no sound at all. Someone in this house had tried her door in the night. She reached into her boot for the knife she had carried for 8 months since a night in Billings, when a man had followed her for 4 blocks before deciding against it. She held it and did not sleep again until gray light showed under the door. In the morning, the twins were at the table before she was. Clara had made biscuits. She received Evelyn's compliment on them with a 9-year-old's mixture of pleasure and studied nonchalance, then said without transition, "My mother taught me. She said a woman who can bake a good biscuit will never have a morning that's completely ruined." "Your mother was right about that," Evelyn said carefully. "She died 3 years ago. Fever." Clara split her biscuit and buttered it with the focus of someone performing surgery. Eli cried for a long time. I cried too, but I did it where he couldn't see, because he was crying enough for both of us, and there's only so much a family can carry at one time. Evelyn sat with this for a moment. "That was very thoughtful of you. Practical," Clara said. "Daddy says feelings are real, but they need a schedule." She looked up. "He's been sad for 3 years, but he's not sad the same way this morning." She said it the way she said everything, simply as data. "I thought you should know." Evelyn looked at her biscuit and said nothing, and felt something press against the inside of her chest that she had no immediate name for. Nathan came in from the barn 40 minutes later. He looked at Evelyn when he came through the door, and she looked back at him and tried to read his face and found very little. He poured himself coffee and sat down and asked Eli about the rope he was working on, and they discussed knot methods with the absorbed specificity of 2 people who actually cared about rope. And Clara listened with patient tolerance, and Evelyn waited. After breakfast, when the twins had gone back out, she said, "Was someone in the hall last night, around the 2nd hour of the morning?" Nathan turned around. His expression was something she had not seen on him before, not surprise. Something more controlled. He set down what he was holding. "My dog," he said. "She sometimes gets restless in the night and walks the hall. She noses at doors." Evelyn looked at him. He looked back. "I don't believe I've seen a dog," she said. "She sleeps in the barn mostly. She came in because of the cold." It might be true. She could not. The rhythm of the footsteps had been wrong for an animal too deliberate. But she had been frightened, and the room had been unfamiliar, and the dark plays tricks. She filed it away without drawing a conclusion. "All right," she said. "Does it matter?" Nathan asked. Not aggressively, genuinely. "It matters to me to know who is walking outside my door at night," she said. "That's all." I was quiet. Then, "I can tell you that nothing in this house will hurt you. I can't promise much else right now. But that one thing." He held her gaze. "You have my word on that." She did not know yet what his word was worth, but she filed that away too. "I need to speak to Robert," she said, "as soon as it can be arranged. I know a way to get a message to him that won't go through his wife. He'll be frightened. Probably." Nathan picked up his hat from the peg. "You said you've memorized what's on those pages." "Yes. All of it. Every name, every number, every signature." He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression she was beginning to recognize, revising upward again. "Then even if they find the papers," he said, "they can't take what you know." "No," Evelyn said. "They can't." He nodded and started for the door. Then he stopped. He turned back. "There's something I need to tell you, before we go further." He set his hat back down on the table, which she had already learned was a signal that what he was about to say required his full presence. "There's a name I've been hearing connected to Merritt Holt's land dealings. A name that's come up twice in conversations I wasn't meant to be part of. I didn't understand why it mattered before tonight." He looked at her steadily. "Is Judge Aldrin Pace on those pages?" The question landed in the kitchen, like something dropped from a height. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked at Nathan's face, really looked at it, and what she saw was not the controlled evenness she had grown accustomed to reading. Something had shifted underneath it. His jaw had tightened by a fraction. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, had closed. "Yes," she said. Nathan Walker, who had walked through a crowd without hurrying, who had faced Harlan Briggs without raising his voice, who had delivered every piece of dangerous information tonight with the calm of a man who had made his peace with difficulty. That man put both hands flat on the kitchen table and stood there for a moment with his eyes down and his breathing deliberate. "How deep?" he said. His voice had changed. Still quiet, but carrying something raw underneath. $9,000, Evelyn said. Across 14 months, recorded in payments from the land holding company connected to Merritt Holt. Nathan did not move for a long moment. When he looked up, his face had recomposed itself, but she had seen underneath it, and she understood now that his steadiness was not the absence of feeling. It was the management of it. A thing built and maintained like a wall that requires daily work. "I have gone into that man's courtroom," he said quietly. "I served on a county board under his supervision for 2 years. I took his word on a water rights dispute that affected 3 families on this mountain." He stopped. His jaw worked. 3 families, Evelyn. It was the first time he had used her given name. "I know," she said. "Who else knows about Pace?" "Only Robert. And now you." Howe was silent for a moment. Then, "My brother is a lawyer in Helena. He's honest, I'd stake anything on that. And he's outside this county, which means he's outside Pace's reach." He looked at her. "I need to get to Foreman's Crossing and send him a letter. Today if possible. Tomorrow at first light if not. And while you're gone, Porter stays. Denny stays." He held her gaze. 2 days. "Can you hold this for 2 days?" Before she could answer, the kitchen door swung open and Clara came in from outside, boots loud on the floor, cheeks red from the cold, carrying something cupped in both hands that turned out to be a small gray stone she had apparently found significant. She stopped when she felt the quality of the room. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at her father. She looked at his hands flat on the table. She was 9 years old, and she read the room the way her father read people completely and without announcing it. She set the stone on the table between them. She did not explain it. Then she said to Evelyn, with the directness of someone delivering a message, "They have decided matters. My mama used to say that the people who find you in the dark are the ones worth keeping." She held Evelyn's eyes for one steady moment. "We found you." She turned and walked back out the door, and her boots were loud again, and then they weren't, and the kitchen was quiet. Nathan looked at the small gray stone on the table. His jaw worked once, and he controlled it and looked away. Evelyn looked at it too, at this ordinary thing a child had picked up from frozen ground and placed between 2 people who needed something to hold on to. She thought about 14 months of silence. She thought about the rope and the cold mud and 30 people who said nothing. She thought about a knife in a boot and documents sewn into a hem and the specific exhaustion of surviving alone. She thought, and then a child finds you in the dark and calls you family and places a stone on a table, and it undoes everything the world spent a year doing to you. She picked up the stone. She held it. She did not cry because she was not yet in a place where crying felt safe, but she sat with the stone in her palm and felt its weight and the particular warmth it had taken on from Clara's hands, and she breathed and she held. Nathan watched her. He did not look away, and he did not fill the silence with words it did not need. After a moment, he picked up his hat from the table. "First light tomorrow," he said quietly. "I'll ride to Foreman's Crossing." Evelyn closed her fingers around the stone. "I'll be here," she said. And in the cold kitchen of a mountain ranch with forged documents sewn into her coat, and a circuit court judge's name burning in the air between them and 2 children somewhere outside, who had already decided what she was to them, Evelyn Carter finally carefully let herself believe that maybe she would be, and that person, whoever they were, was not yet finished. A fact. Evelyn understood the way you understand cold, when it gets deep enough into your bones that it stops being a sensation and becomes simply the truth of the world you're living in. The message to Robert went out the next morning, carried by a boy named Denny, who worked odd jobs at the feed store and who Nathan trusted for reasons he did not explain, and Evelyn did not press him on. Nathan wrote the note himself, 2 lines only, on a scrap of brown paper, and sealed it with nothing, because sealing it would only make it look important, and Denny tucked it into his boot like it was nothing at all, and walked down the mountain road into town with his hands in his pockets whistling. Evelyn watched him go from the porch and said, "How long?" "Depends on whether Robert's wife answers the door," Nathan said. He was behind her checking a harness that he'd pulled off the peg. "If she does, probably never. If Denny catches him at the recorder's office or coming out of the dry goods store maybe before supper. And if Harlan has someone watching Robert, then we'll know that too soon enough." Evelyn turned around. "You're very calm about all of this." Nathan looked up from the harness. "Would it help if I wasn't?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I suppose it wouldn't." "Then I'll stay calm." He went back to the harness. "Go eat something. Clara made biscuits. She'll be insulted if they go cold." Inside. Clara was indeed waiting with an air of someone who had invested significantly in an outcome. The biscuits were good, better than good actually, with a particular lightness that suggested she had done this many times and paid attention each time, and Evelyn said so, and Clara received the compliment with a 9-year-old's mixture of pleasure and studied nonchalance that was so transparent and so genuine that Evelyn felt something clench in her chest. "My mother taught me," Clara said. She said it the way children say things about dead mothers matter-of-factly, because the fact itself is enormous, and saying it simply is the only way to say it without being crushed by it. She said a woman who can bake a good biscuit will never have a morning that's completely ruined. "Your mother was right about that," Evelyn said. Clara looked at her steadily. "She died 3 years ago. Fever." "I know. I'm sorry. Daddy doesn't talk about it much." Clara split her biscuit and buttered it with the focus of someone performing surgery. "Eli cried for a long time. I cried too, but I did it where he couldn't see, because he was crying enough for both of us already, and there's only so much a family can carry at one time." She said this with a 9-year-old's unintentional profundity, and Evelyn sat with it for a moment before responding. "That was very thoughtful of you," Evelyn said carefully. "Practical," Clara said. "Daddy says feelings are real, but they need a schedule." Evelyn almost laughed. "Does he?" "He means you can feel them, but you have to also do the work." Clara looked up. "He's been sad for 3 years, though. He does the work, but he's still sad. You can tell if you watch him right." Evelyn looked at her biscuit. "He's not sad the same way this morning," Clara added with the equanimity of someone simply reporting data. "I thought you should know." Denny came back before noon, and not with the news Evelyn had been hoping for. He came up the mountain road at a pace that was slightly too fast for casual, and Nathan met him in the yard, and Evelyn came to the door and watched them talk. She could not hear the words, but she could read Nathan's body, the slight stilling, the way his hands stopped moving, the quality of his attention that shifted from routine to something else. When Denny left, Nathan stood in the yard for a moment without moving, and then he turned and came to the house, and Evelyn stepped back from the door to let him in. "Robert's gone," he said. "Gone where?" "Nobody knows. His wife said he left yesterday morning before she woke. She came downstairs and his coat was gone, and his boots and she said his record ledgers from the office were gone too. The ones he kept at home." Nathan set his hat on the table. "She was frightened," Denny said. "Not angry frightened, genuinely frightened." Evelyn sat down. She had not meant to her knees, simply made the decision. "He ran." "Looks like. Something pushed him. Something happened between the night he gave me those papers and yesterday morning that made him decide he couldn't stay." She pressed her fingers together. "Or someone found out he'd given them to me, and he was given a choice between running and something worse." Nathan sat across from her. "Or he's been taken." The word landed with the weight he had not tried to soften it with. Evelyn looked at him. "His wife's account makes it sound like he left on his own," Nathan said. "But a man can be persuaded to walk out his own front door and look entirely voluntary about it. If they've taken Robert, then the papers you're carrying are the only record of whatever he documented." Nathan's voice was even. "Which means they become considerably more valuable and considerably more dangerous." Evelyn stood up again. She could not sit still. She moved to the window and back, and Nathan let her move without comment, which she appreciated. "Robert wasn't a brave man," she said. He knew something was wrong and he was afraid, and he gave me those papers because he needed to give them to someone, and I was there. He did one brave thing, and then I don't blame him. I genuinely don't. But it means I'm the only one who knows what's in them. Tell me what's in them, Nathan said. I already told you. Tell me specifically. Names, numbers, everything you memorized. He held her gaze. If something happens to you, someone else needs to know. She stopped moving. It was she recognized the most direct and practical expression of concern she had ever had offered to her, which made it more affecting than most expressions of concern she had received, because it had no performance in it whatsoever. It was simply, I need to know what you know, in case you are no longer in a position to use it. All right, she said and sat back down. She talked for 40 minutes. Nathan listened with his elbows on the table and his eyes on her face, and he did not interrupt. Only asked occasional questions that were precise and well-aimed questions that showed he was not just hearing the information, but organizing it, building a structure out of it in his head. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Harlan Briggs isn't the one running this, he said. No. Evelyn agreed. I don't think he is. The signatures on those transfer documents, you're certain about the name you recognized. She had not told him which name. She had been careful about that, because it was the piece of information she was most afraid of and most reluctant to say aloud, as if naming it would make it solid in a new and dangerous way. Judge Aldrin Pace, she said. Nathan's expression did not change, but his hands, which had been flat on the table, folded inward slightly. The circuit court judge, he said. Yes. Whose signature would be required to legitimize any legal challenge to a land transfer in this county? Yes. So if someone were acquiring land through fraudulent transfers and wanted protection against any legal challenge to those transfers, they'd need the judge, Evelyn said, or they'd need the judge to be complicit. Nathan stood up and went to the window, and this time it was Evelyn who let him move without comment. She watched his back and waited. Pace has been circuit judge for 11 years, Nathan said. He's got a reputation for being fair. Reputations are decided by what people know, Evelyn said, and by what they don't. He turned around. He looked at her with the expression she was coming to recognize that upward revision, and this time there was something else in it too, something she was less practiced at reading in his face. You've been sitting on this for weeks, he said. Alone, in a boarding house. It wasn't comfortable, she said. No, he said. I'd imagine not. He paused. Why didn't you go to the sheriff yourself? With what 4 pages? I found sewn in my coat that my frightened cousin by marriage handed me without a word of context that implicate a sitting circuit court judge. To Tom Haskell, who is a decent man, but who lives and practices law in a county where Aldrin Pace decides things. She shook her head. I needed more. I needed to understand what I had before I used it. Because you only get one chance to make an accusation like that, and if it's not enough, they bury you with it, Nathan said. Yes. He sat back down. So what do you need? Robert, she said flatly. I need Robert because Robert knows more than what's on those pages. He was the one who recorded the documents. I was in that office when those transfers went through. He may have spoken to Pace directly. He's the witness. She paused. Without Robert, I have documents that could be disputed or destroyed, and a memory that will be called the delusion of a grieving woman with no property and no standing. Nathan was quiet. I know, Evelyn said before he could say whatever careful thing he was preparing to say. I know how it sounds, but that's the situation. Then we find Robert, he said. Simple as that. As if finding a man who might have been taken, or might have run in fear for his life, was a thing you simply decided to do, and then did it. Nathan. She had not used his given name before. It came out on its own. These people removed a woman from her town with a rope in front of 30 witnesses. They've run homesteaders off their land. They have a circuit court judge. She paused. I don't want you and your children in the middle of this because of me. He looked at her for a long moment. Eli and Clara put themselves in the middle of it last night, he said. I can argue with the weather about that, but it won't change anything. He picked up his hat from the table. And as for what these people are willing to do, I'd rather know that now and make choices about it than find out later when I don't have any choices left. He went out to the barn. Evelyn sat at the table for a while and looked at the space where he had been, and then she got up and washed the biscuit plates and thought about what it meant when a person treated your danger as their problem, and found that she did not have a framework for it that worked without falling apart somewhere in the middle. Harlan Briggs made his next move 2 days later. He did not come to the ranch himself. He sent Pete Doyle, which was both a message and a tactic, Pete Doyle being the kind of man whose presence at your door was not immediately threatening, which meant you let him in before you understood what he was carrying. Nathan did not let him in. He met Pete in the yard, and Evelyn watched from the window with Clara beside her, Clara having appointed herself to this role without being asked. "What's he saying?" Clara asked. "I can't hear." "Daddy's face is doing the thing," Clara observed. "What thing?" "The thing where he's deciding something." Clara chewed her thumbnail. "He does it when the other person thinks they're winning." Pete handed Nathan a folded paper. Nathan looked at it without opening it. Then he said something. Pete's posture changed, a slight recoil, a stiffening. He said something back. Nathan said something else still without raising his voice, and Pete looked at the folded paper and then at Nathan, and then turned and walked back down the road without another word. Nathan came inside. He unfolded the paper and read it, and then set it flat on the table. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "Harlan's claiming you stole items from Mrs. Donahue's boarding house before you left. He's saying she's willing to swear to it." Nathan's voice was level. "It's a formal written complaint. He wants you to come into town to answer it." "Mrs. Donahue would never." Evelyn stopped. She thought about Mrs. Donahue's face. She thought about the way a person changes when someone applies the right kind of pressure in the right kind of place. Unless someone gave her a reason. "Or a threat," Nathan said. Clara said from the window, "She's scared of that man, Mrs. Donahue. I've seen her face when Harlan Briggs walks past the boarding house." Both adults looked at her. Clara looked back at them with the equanimity of someone who did not see why her observation should be surprising. "I pay attention to people," she said simply. Nathan looked back at the paper. "Harlan wants you in town because he wants you away from this ranch. In town, you're accessible. In town, there's no one between you and whatever he has planned next." He refolded the paper. "You're not going. If I don't respond to a formal complaint, then Tom Haskell will come up here to discuss it, and when he does, he'll be looking at you in a place where you're not roped and dragged, and we'll have a different conversation. And if Tom Haskell is already part of this..." Nathan set down the paper. "He's not." "You're certain?" "Tom Haskell has been the sheriff of this county for 8 years. I've watched the man. He has a decent core that he's managed to hold on to, which is harder than it sounds in a place where a circuit judge is signing off on land fraud." He looked at her. "He's not part of it, but he might not fully understand what he's adjacent to. Then we need to bring him in carefully." "Yes," Nathan said. "We do." Evelyn looked at the paper. Harlan is escalating because Robert disappeared. He needed Robert to stay put and stay quiet, and Robert has done something unpredictable. Now Harlan has to move faster than he wants to. She traced the edges of the folded paper without touching it, which means he'll make mistakes. "People in a hurry usually do," Nathan agreed, "but they also cause more damage when they do." She looked up. "Clara, will you go check on Eli? I think he was in the south pasture." Clara did not point out that she did not take directions from Evelyn, because Clara was a perceptive child who understood that some conversations were for adults. She simply nodded and went out, and Evelyn waited until the door closed. "I need to tell you something I didn't tell you before," Evelyn said. Nathan waited. "On the pages Robert gave me, there's a name I didn't mention. A name that appears alongside Aldrin Pace's, but in a different context, not on the transfer documents themselves, but on a separate page that appears to be a record of payments." She paused. "The name is Benjamin Holt." Nathan sat very still. "Merritt Holt's son." "Yes. Benjamin Holt is 23 years old, and he sits on the Territorial Land Commission." Nathan's voice had changed slightly, not louder, more careful. "He was appointed 18 months ago. He would have influence over which land parcels qualified for certain designations that affect their value. And if certain parcels were designated in a particular way before being acquired, and a circuit court judge smoothed the legal path for those acquisitions, and the payments recorded on that page are what I think they are. Then this isn't a local fraud, Nathan said. It's territorial. The fire cracked. Neither of them moved. That's why Robert ran, Evelyn said quietly. He understood what he had, and he understood that local isn't enough to contain it. And he understood that the people with enough reach to respond to it have significant reach. Nathan stood up. He moved to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she let him stand there because she knew this was the moment where a reasonable man reconsidered. This was the moment where the calculation became clear. One side had a bound widow and 4 pages of evidence and the testimony of a missing man, and the other side had a circuit court judge and a territorial commissioner, and whatever Harlan Briggs was, when you stripped away the pretense of community enforcement. I had a letter from my brother in Helena 2 months ago, Nathan said, still looking out the window. He mentioned that there's a federal land examiner doing a review of territorial commission decisions from the last 2 years. Someone in Washington noticed a pattern in acquisition rates in this region. Evelyn absorbed this slowly. A federal examiner, reviewing decisions from the last 2 years. He turned around. If someone in Washington already suspects something, and there's documentary evidence here that could confirm it, then the evidence needs to reach the federal examiner, Evelyn said. Not Tom Haskell, not a territorial court. Someone outside the reach of Aldrin Pace. Yes. How do we reach a federal examiner in Helena from Black Pine, Montana, while Harlan Briggs is filing complaints against me, and Robert is missing, and whoever is above Harlan knows we have those pages? Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, my brother is a lawyer in Helena. He knows the examiner by name. He's honest, I know that about him the way I know my own hands. And he's outside this county, which means he's outside Pace's reach. Can you get a letter to him quickly? I can ride to the relay station at Foreman's Crossing myself. 1.5 days if the road holds. That's 1.5 days each way, Evelyn said. And while you're gone, you'd be here with the twins. I'm not worried about myself, Evelyn said immediately, and meant it. What she was worried about was the specific look that crossed Nathan's face when she said it, that same shadow she had seen on the night he walked through the crowd, quick and controlled and gone. Denny can stay, Nathan said. And there's a ranch hand named Porter who sleeps in the bunkhouse. They're both capable men. I don't want to send you 3 days into the wilderness because of... Don't, Nathan said. His voice was still quiet, but it had an edge now, not anger, something more immediate than anger. Don't finish that sentence the way I think you're going to finish it. Evelyn stopped. You were going to say because of me, he said. And I need you to understand something, Mrs. Carter. I am not doing this because of you. I'm doing this because what's on those pages is wrong, and I live in this county, and these are the people living in it with me. And if I have a way to do something about it, and I don't do it, then I'm no different from the 30 people who stood in the street 2 nights ago and didn't say a word. He held her gaze. Do you understand the difference? She did. She understood it precisely because it was the kind of distinction that mattered, the difference between charity and principle, between doing the right thing for someone and doing the right thing because it was right. Yes, she said. I understand. Good. He picked up his hat. I'll leave at first light tomorrow. I'd like you to write down everything you know, not from the pages from your head. Every name, every number, everything in the order you remember it. Give it to me tonight. If something happens to those papers, or to you, or to me. Someone still knows, Evelyn said. Someone still knows, he agreed. That's the only thing that matters right now. That night, Evelyn wrote for 2 hours by the lamp in her room. She wrote everything. Every name, every parcel number, every date, every signature she had memorized from those 4 folded pages in the week since Robert had pressed them into her hand. She wrote what she understood and what she only suspected, distinguishing carefully between the two, because she knew that conflating them would be the kind of mistake that gave people like Aldrin Pace the leverage to discredit the whole account. She wrote in her small, clear hand on 5 pages of paper Nathan had provided, and she did not spare anything. and when she was done, she read it back to herself twice and added 3 details she had nearly missed and then folded the pages and held them. She had a decision to make. The papers in her hem, the originals, were the foundation. Her written account was a backup. But neither was certain, and Nathan was right that if something happened to either one of them, the whole case collapsed. What they needed was for the information to exist in multiple places, in multiple hands, beyond anyone's ability to suppress. She thought about who else she trusted. The list was short, and 2 days ago it would have been non-existent. There was a knock at her door. Light specific 2 taps the way a particular kind of careful person knocks. "Come in," she said. It was Nathan. He stood in the doorway, and she held out the pages, and he took them and folded them into his inside coat pocket without looking at them. "You should read them," she said, "in case you need to speak to their contents." "I will." He paused. "How are you?" It was such a simple question, and he asked it so directly that she almost didn't know how to receive it. "I'm managing," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "Then I'll tell you the truth. I'm frightened, and I'm tired, and I haven't slept properly in 6 weeks, and I'm sitting here in a situation that I did not create and cannot fully control, and 2 children that I've known for less than 3 days have shown me more uncomplicated kindness than most adults I've encountered in the last year, and I don't entirely know what to do with that." She paused. "And I think you're a good man, and I think this is going to be significantly harder before it gets better. And I'm worried about you riding to Foreman's Crossing when Harlan Briggs is watching this road." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "He won't move against me directly," he said. "Not yet. He's too careful for that, and he doesn't have a clean pretext." He didn't have a clean pretext for the rope either. "That's true." He leaned against the doorframe. "But that was aimed at you, not at me. I'm a rancher with land and a name in this community, and a brother who's a lawyer in Helena. Harlan Briggs will want to discredit me before he moves against me, and that takes time he doesn't have right now. You've thought about this carefully." "I think about everything carefully," he said. "It's a habit." "Your daughter says feelings need a schedule." Something crossed his face, warm and pained in equal measure. "She told you that. Is it yours or hers?" "Both, I think," he said. "It started as mine, and she made it better." He straightened from the doorframe. "Try to sleep, Mrs. Carter. I mean that practically, not as a pleasantry. You need to be sharp." "Evelyn," she said. He stopped. "If you're riding 3 days on my account," she said, "you can use my given name." He looked at her for a moment, and in the lamplight, his face was harder to read than it was in daylight, but there was something in it that was not nothing. "Evelyn," he said, "try to sleep." He pulled the door closed. He left before dawn. She heard him in the yard, heard the horse, the low, even voice he used with animals, the sound of hooves on frozen ground going quiet as he took the road down the mountain. The twins slept through it. Evelyn lay awake and listened until there was nothing left to listen to. And then she got up and put on her dress and her coat and went to the kitchen and built up the fire because someone had to, and Clara would be up in an hour, and there should be coffee. Porter, the ranch hand, came in at 7 stamping snow off his boots and looked surprised to find her there. "Morning," he said carefully. "Sit down," Evelyn said. "Coffee's ready." He sat. He was a broad, quiet man in his 40s, with the specific patience of someone who had done outdoor work his whole life and had long since stopped expecting anything from indoors except warmth. He looked at his coffee. "Mr. Walker told me to watch the road," he said. "I know. He didn't tell me why. Someone may come up from town," Evelyn said. "If they do, I need you to let me know before you let them in the yard." Porter looked at her over his cup. "You're the widow Harlan Briggs ran out the other night." "I'm Evelyn Carter," she said. "Yes." He nodded slow. "I was in town when it happened. I was coming out of the hardware." He looked at his coffee again. "I didn't do anything." Evelyn was quiet. "I stood there like the rest of them," he said. "Didn't do a thing." "You're here now," Evelyn said. Porter looked up. "That's what matters," she said. not as a comfort, as a fact. He held his cup and nodded once, and something in him settled, and they sat in the kitchen together, while the fire built, and the twins slept, and the mountain held its cold, and Evelyn thought about Nathan on the road to Foreman's Crossing, riding through a darkness that was not yet even beginning to lift. She thought about the pages in her hem, and the 5 pages in his coat pocket, and Robert somewhere unknown, and Judge Aldrin Pace, in his comfortable office, signing his name to things that bore other men's names. She thought about Harlan Briggs and whatever his next move was. She thought about what Clara had said, that Nathan was not sad the same way this morning, and she did not know what to do with that, so she put it aside in the careful, organized way she had learned to put things aside when she could not deal with them immediately. There was a shelf in her mind for things that required more information before she could act on them, and she put it there, and she put a lock on the shelf. Porter finished his coffee and went back out. The twins came down 40 minutes later, and Clara stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the fire and the coffee and Evelyn at the table, and something in her face shifted in a way that was too layered for a 9-year-old's face. But Evelyn was coming to understand a 9-year-old in age only. "Daddy's gone," Clara asked. "He'll be back in 3 days," Evelyn said. Clara looked at her for a moment with those clear eyes. Then she came to the table and sat down and put her elbows on it and her chin in her hands and said, "Then we should figure out what needs doing while he's gone. There's a fence post in the south pasture that Eli's been ignoring." "I have not," Eli said from behind her. "You have." "I noted it." "Noting is not fixing." Evelyn looked at the two of them and felt something she could not name press against the inside of her chest. "After breakfast," she said. "We'll look at the fence post after breakfast." And then, not 3 minutes later, Porter was at the kitchen window with his knuckles against the glass, and his face was a face that said something was happening, and Evelyn was up before she had consciously decided to stand. "Stay inside," she said to the twins. Clara's eyes were sharp and already moving. "What is it?" "Someone on the road," Porter said through the glass. "Coming up fast, not from town, from the east." The east road did not come from Black Pine. It came from the other direction entirely, from Foreman's Crossing, and the relay stations beyond, and the longer routes that connected this part of the territory to the world outside it. Evelyn went to the window. The rider was coming hard, pushing the horse in a way that spoke of urgency or fear, and it was not a figure she recognized at the distance, and it was not a horse she knew. Porter had his hand near his belt without quite touching it, which was the posture of a man who was being careful but was not yet committed to a direction. The rider came into the yard and pulled up. Howe was young, mid-20s, thin, with a face full of road dust and an expression that was somewhere between relief and terror. And he looked at the house, and then at Porter, and then at the house again. "Nathan Walker's place," he called. "Who's asking?" Porter said. "My name is Carter," the young man said. "Robert Carter. I'm looking for my cousin. Her name is Evelyn." And Evelyn was already pushing past Porter and through the door before the last word finished leaving Robert's mouth. Moo. Part 3. The Truth Behind the Widow's Fall. She stopped 3 feet from his horse. Robert looked down at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because 14 months of silence and distance and fear had built something between them that words were going to have to dismantle one brick at a time. He looked terrible. Not just road-worn, hollowed out, like a man who had not slept in days and had spent the waking hours of those days being afraid. His coat was wrong for the weather, too thin, and there was a cut above his left eyebrow that had been cleaned, but not well, and his hands on the reins were unsteady in a way that was not from cold. "Robert," Evelyn said. He got down from the horse. He was not graceful about it. His legs were stiff, and he stumbled on the dismount and caught himself on the saddle horn. And then he stood in the yard and looked at her, and his face did something that was partway between relief and something much closer to shame. "I'm sorry," he said. "Evelyn, I am. I need you to know that I am sorry. I gave you those papers, and then I left you there, and I told myself it was because I had no choice, and I did have a choice. I made the wrong one. I know that." "Come inside," Evelyn said. "Right now. We can talk about what you owe me later." Porter was already taking the horse's reins. Clara and Eli were in the doorway, watching with the focused attention of children who understood something significant was happening. Evelyn took Robert's arm and moved him toward the house, and she felt him trembling through his coat sleeve. Not just cold, not just fatigue. The particular trembling of a man whose fear had been constant for long enough that his body had stopped distinguishing between rest and terror. She sat him at the kitchen table. She poured coffee. She put bread and the last of the morning's biscuits in front of him, and he ate without ceremony, which told her how long it had been since he'd had a proper meal, and she sat across from him and waited while he got enough food and warmth into him to be able to speak like himself. Clara, to her credit, took Eli out to the south pasture without being asked. When Robert finally set down the cup and looked at her, his eyes were clearer. Still frightened, but clearer. "How did you know to come here?" Evelyn asked. "I didn't at first," Robert said. "I was in Carlisle, that's 30 miles east. I've been there 4 days, trying to figure out where to go. I heard what happened in Black Pine from a man who'd come through. He said a widow named Carter had been run out of town with a rope, and a rancher named Walker had stopped it, and Walker's children had called her family." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he controlled it with effort. "It wasn't hard to find you after that. Who else heard that story in Carlisle?" Robert's expression changed. "I don't know. I didn't think." "Think now," Evelyn said, not unkindly but firmly. "Robert, if you heard it in Carlisle, anyone looking for you might hear it too, and following the same logic, find the same road." He went slightly gray. "I came fast," he said. "I don't think anyone was following me." "All right." She put her hand flat on the table, not touching him, but close enough that it was an anchor. "Tell me what happened, from the beginning. Tell me what you know and how you know it, and don't leave anything out because you think it'll frighten me." He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. And then he started to talk. It had begun, he said, about 18 months ago. A man had come to the county recorder's office, not Harlan Briggs. A man Robert had not seen before, well-dressed with a manner that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. He had asked Robert to pull the records for 6 specific land parcels along the North Ridge. Robert had pulled them. The man had looked at them for a long time. Then he had asked Robert in a tone that was not quite a question what the process would be for a correction to a recorded transfer. Robert had explained the process. A straightforward clerical correction required the signatures of both original parties, or if one party was deceased or unavailable, a probate order and the signature of a circuit court judge. The man had nodded and left. 2 weeks later, the first corrected transfer had come through. It had all the right signatures. Robert had processed it. A parcel of 120 acres on the North Ridge previously recorded as belonging to a homesteader named Elias Finn, now reflecting a transfer to a land-holding company called Ridge Meridian. The signature of the circuit court was Judge Aldrin Pace. The probate documentation cited Elias Finn as deceased, which Robert discovered later when he looked into it was accurate. Finn had died the prior winter of a heart ailment. But Finn had a son, and the son had never signed anything. "You noticed," Evelyn said. "Not immediately," Robert said, and there was self-recrimination in it that was old and worn like a rock that had been turned over many times. "Not for it was the 4th transfer. The 4th one I looked at the probate documentation, and something about the date was wrong. The date on the death certificate didn't match the county health record I had on file from when Finn's wife filed for their homestead extension the previous spring. The health record listed Finn as living. The probate death certificate said he'd been dead for 2 months by that same date. So someone forged the death certificate. Or altered it, yes." Robert's hands were around his cup now, holding on. "I pulled the other 3 transfers and looked at them again. They were cleaner. I couldn't find anything technically wrong. But once I knew what I was looking for..." He shook his head. "The holding company. Ridge Meridian. It doesn't exist as a real company. I couldn't find a territorial filing for it, no county registration, nothing. It's a name on paper. A name that Merritt Holt controls," Evelyn said. Robert looked at her quickly. "Or Benjamin Holt," she said. "Or both." "How do you..." He stopped. "The pages I gave you. You read them more carefully than I expected. I memorized them, Evelyn said. Robert stared at her. Every name, every number in order. She held his gaze. Did Benjamin Holt know you had those records? I don't know how much Benjamin knows directly, Robert said slowly. He's on the Territorial Commission, but he presents himself as having nothing to do with the day-to-day. His father Merritt is the face of it locally. Harlan Briggs handles the enforcement side. He paused. Harlan came to my office 4 months ago. He didn't threaten me, not directly. He asked me how my record-keeping was going. He asked if I had everything organized properly. He mentioned that the county auditor had been known to review recorders' offices on short notice, and that errors in documentation could result in personal liability. He smiled the whole time, like we were having a pleasant conversation, and after he left, I started copying the transfer documents, every one I could find. I put the copies in the ledger I kept at home, the one I took when I left. He looked at her. I have it with me, in the saddlebag. Evelyn went very still. Robert, she said carefully. A ledger with copied transfer documents. 17 transfers total, he said. With notes I made at the time about discrepancies, dates that didn't match, signatures I compared side by side. He looked slightly surprised by the expression on her face. Is that useful? That, Evelyn said, is the entire case. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time without fully understanding how heavy it was. Nathan Walker has gone to Foreman's Crossing, Evelyn said. He's sending a letter to his brother in Helena, who is a lawyer and who knows the federal land examiner currently reviewing Territorial Commission decisions. She watched Robert's face process this. If your ledger is what you say it is, and the papers I'm carrying are what I know they are, then between the two of us, we have enough for a federal case. Robert said quietly. There's something else in the ledger. She waited. The payments, he said. To Pace. I found the original payment records in the files. They were misfiled, I think accidentally in with an older land case. Someone put them in the wrong folder. I copied them exactly. He looked at her. Judge Pace received $9,000 over 14 months from an account that traces to Ridge Meridian. $9,000. In this county, in this economy, in a territory where a working rancher like Nathan Walker ran his operation on margins thin enough to feel every season, $9,000 was not a side arrangement. It was the entire purchase price of a man's conscience rendered in installments. Get the ledger, Evelyn said. Robert went out. He came back with a leather-bound book that was swollen with inserted pages and stuffed so full that the binding was straining. He set it on the table, and Evelyn opened it and started reading, and what she found was more comprehensive than she had dared hope. Careful, methodical, the work of a frightened man who had nevertheless done the thing a recorder is trained to do, which was document everything with precision. She was halfway through it when Porter knocked on the window. His face was wrong again. The same face as before, but worse. 2 riders, he said through the glass. Coming up from town, moving steady, not in a hurry, which is the part that worries me. Evelyn closed the ledger. Robert, she said, take this and go to the room at the end of the hall and do not come out regardless of what you hear. She looked at him. Do you understand me regardless? Robert picked up the ledger with both hands and held it to his chest like something sacred and went down the hall without a word. Evelyn tucked the ledger's existence into her mind, alongside everything else she was holding, and went to the door. The 2 riders were Cal Rourke and a man she didn't know. Tall, weathered, with the look of someone whose specific employment was the kind that didn't get written down in business ledgers. Cal did the talking, which told her the other man was there for a different purpose. Mrs. Carter, Cal said. He had his hat in his hands, which was either courtesy or performance. I've got a message from Harlan. Harlan can send his messages through the sheriff, Evelyn said. She was standing in the doorway with Porter beside her, and she kept her voice even and her hands visible because the unknown rider was watching her hands. Harlan figures you'd rather handle this privately, Cal said. He says to tell you he knows Robert came here. He says the situation has changed, and there's a conversation to be had that could benefit everyone. Evelyn looked at him. What conversation? He says if you turn over what Robert brought with him, and you agree to leave the county quietly, he'll see to it that Robert's name stays out of any proceedings. Robert gets to go back to his life. You get to go somewhere and start fresh." Cal paused. "He says nobody has to get hurt. And if I decline?" Cal glanced at the man beside him. Brief, involuntary, the glance of someone checking to make sure the back of the room is covered. "He says you should think carefully before declining." Porter beside her shifted his weight. "Cal Rourke," Evelyn said. "I've known who you are since I came to this town. I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a man who made some choices without fully understanding where they led. And now you're standing in front of a woman you helped drag through the street with a rope carrying a message on behalf of someone who is going to take everyone around him down when this falls apart." She watched his face. "And it is going to fall apart. You understand that, don't you? This is not a situation that holds together much longer." Cal said nothing, but his jaw moved. "Go back to Harlan," she said. "Tell him I am not leaving this county. Tell him what Robert has brought with him will be in the hands of a federal land examiner within the week. And tell him—" She paused. "Tell him the time for private conversations has passed." The unknown writer spoke for the first time. His voice was flat and without inflection, which was somehow worse than if it had been menacing. "Ma'am, you don't fully understand who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Evelyn said. "I've had the names memorized for 6 weeks." She looked at him without expression. "Do you want me to list them?" The writer looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that was recalibration. He looked at Cal. Cal put his hat back on. "I'll tell him," he said quietly, and turned his horse. The unknown rider held a moment longer, and Evelyn held his gaze without blinking. And then he turned too, and they went back down the mountain road at the same steady pace they had come up with. Porter let out a slow breath beside her. "That was either very smart or very dangerous," he said. "Both," Evelyn said. "Let's get the children in from the south pasture." She sent Denny down the mountain that afternoon with a letter. Not to Helena, she had no line to Helena without Nathan. To Tom Haskell, the sheriff, whose decency Nathan had staked his judgment on, and Nathan Walker's judgment. Evelyn had decided was something she was prepared to extend credit to. She wrote carefully. She named what she had. She named Robert Carter as a witness. She did not name Aldrin Pace in the letter, because she did not yet know whether Tom Haskell was sharp enough to handle that name without either panicking or, worse, going to Pace directly out of some misplaced sense of procedural correctness. She told Haskell that she had evidence of fraud connected to land transfers in the county, and that she was prepared to present it, and she asked him to come to the Walker Ranch without informing anyone in advance that he was coming. The last part was the gamble. If Haskell told the wrong person he was coming, Harlan would know before the sheriff arrived, and the window would close. But if she didn't ask him to come at all, she was simply sitting on the mountain with Robert and a ledger, and 2 children, and a ranch hand waiting for Nathan to come back from Foreman's Crossing. And every hour she waited was an hour Harlan had to figure out his next move. She gave the letter to Denny. She watched him go. Then she went back inside, and found Robert sitting in the kitchen with Clara on one side of him and Eli on the other. And Clara was explaining the properties of a particular fence post repair method with an authority that suggested she had strong opinions about woodworking, and Robert was listening with an expression that was half bewildered and half desperately grateful for having something to listen to that was not his own fear. He looked up when Evelyn came in. "Your plan," he said. "The sheriff is the next move," she said. "What if he doesn't come? Then we wait for Nathan. And if Harlan moves before Nathan gets back, Robert." She sat down. Clara and Eli watched her with the focused attention of children who had decided to be useful by being very quiet. "You came across 30 miles of hard road to find me. You brought a ledger that documents 17 fraudulent transfers and $9,000 in payments to a sitting judge. You did the work when you were frightened, and you brought it here." She paused. "That wasn't nothing. That was everything. So I need you to hold on for another day and a half." He looked at the table. He looked at Clara, who gave him the steady evaluating look of someone who had already decided she approved of him, but was giving him the opportunity to confirm it. He looked at Eli, who nodded once, with the grave certainty of someone whose opinion was not in question. "All right," Robert said. "Good." Evelyn stood. "Clara, will you make sure Porter has supper?" "Already planned," Clara said, returning to her fence post discussion with the smoothness of someone who had never really left it. Tom Haskell came the next morning. He came alone, which was either because he trusted her letter enough to honor the request, or because he was cautious enough not to want witnesses to a conversation whose direction he couldn't predict. Either way, he was alone, and that was what mattered. How was a solid man in his 50s with a sheriff's star and a sheriff's face. Not theatrical, not imposing, just settled into itself the way a good tool settles into a hand after years of use. He sat at the kitchen table, and he listened to Evelyn without interrupting, and he listened to Robert without interrupting, and he looked at the ledger for a long time, turning the pages slowly, and when he had looked at everything, he set his hands flat on the table and was quiet. "Judge Pace," he said finally. "Yes," Evelyn said. Haskell was quiet again. He looked at the window. He looked at the ledger. "I have gone into that man's courtroom for 8 years. He said in a voice that was not exactly anger and not exactly grief, and was some particular compound of both that only comes from a specific kind of betrayal. "I know," Evelyn said. 8 years. He turned a page in the ledger and then turned it back. "Families lost land, Mrs. Carter. The Finn boy, old Elias's son, he came to me. He came to me and said something was wrong with his father's estate, and I told him to take it to Pace's court." Haskell's jaw worked. "I told him to take it to Pace." The silence in the kitchen was the kind that held weight. "You didn't know," Evelyn said. "I should have—" "You didn't know," she said again firmly and without cruelty. "And what you do now is what matters." She waited. "Will you go to Pace?" Haskell looked up. "No." Quick and flat like a door closing. "I will not go to Pace. I'll send a wire to the federal marshal in Helena today." He paused. "Do you know if Walker reached his brother?" "Not yet. He should be back tomorrow." "All right." Haskell closed the ledger carefully with the hands of a man who understood he was holding something significant and wanted to be seen treating it that way. "I want these documents out of this county today. I want copies made and sent by 2 different routes." "I have the originals," Evelyn said, reaching into her coat. Haskell watched her unsew the hem. He watched the 4 folded pages come out. He looked at them with an expression that was half professional and half something more personal. The face of a man looking at the thing that explained years of things that had never quite made sense. "You've been carrying these for 6 weeks, he said. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "And they dragged you out of town with a rope?" "They did." Haskell looked at the pages for another moment. "I owe you an apology on behalf of this county, Mrs. Carter." "You can deliver it properly," Evelyn said, "after we finish this." For the first time since he'd arrived, something in Haskell's face shifted toward what might, in better circumstances, have been a smile. "Fair enough," he said. Howe was still at the table making a copy of the key documents in his steady recorder's hand when the sound came from outside. Not riders. This time, something faster, a single horse at a dead gallop, and Porter shouted from the yard, a wordless warning shout, and Evelyn was at the window in 2 strides. The horse coming up the mountain road was Nathan's. Howe was pushing hard, leaning forward, and even at the distance, she could read that something had changed. Not the measured pace of a man returning from a planned errand. The pace of a man who had received news and was bringing it back as fast as the animal beneath him could carry it. He came into the yard and was off the horse before it had fully stopped, and Porter caught the reins, and Nathan came to the door and came through it, and looked first at Evelyn, and then at the sheriff, and then at the ledger on the table, and the 4 pages beside it. He took in all of it in about 3 seconds. "My brother got the letter before I arrived," he said. His voice was tightly controlled. He'd already been in contact with the land examiner. The federal examiner had been looking for a local source. He's been waiting for documentation. He looked at Haskell. "Tom." "Nathan." Haskell's voice was careful. "How much of this have you seen?" "Enough," Haskell said. "Then you know about Pace." A beat. I know. Nathan put both hands on the back of a chair and stood there for a moment, and Evelyn could see him organizing what he knew into what needed to happen next, which was the thing she had come to understand. He took complicated and dangerous situations and moved through them methodically, without panic and without the particular male performance of not being afraid. He was afraid. She could see that. He was afraid, and he was moving anyway, which was the only kind of courage that was worth anything. The federal examiner can be here in 4 days, Nathan said. My brother is sending a wire this morning. He needs a statement from Robert and authenticated copies of the documents. He looked at Robert, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding his ledger like a shield. Are you willing to give a statement? Robert looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked back at him. She did not encourage him or reassure him because she had learned that encouragement at the wrong moment can undermine a person who needs to find their own ground. She waited. Robert looked at Nathan. Yes, he said. I'm willing. Good. Nathan straightened. Tom, can you get a wire to Helena today without going through the main office? I can go to Miller's store, Haskell said. Use their wire. Harlan doesn't have eyes there. Then we have 4 days. Nathan looked around the kitchen at Haskell, at Robert, at Porter in the doorway from outside, at Clara and Eli, who had come back from wherever they had been and were standing quietly against the wall, in the way of children who understand when being still is the contribution. He looked at Evelyn last. 4 days, he said again to her specifically. Can you hold this together for 4 days? She thought about 6 weeks alone in a boarding house with forged documents sewn into her hem. She thought about the rope. She thought about the 30 silent faces, and the cold mud, and the particular desperation of a person who has no ground to stand on. She thought about Clara's hands wrapping around her wrists in the dark. I've been holding it together considerably longer than 4 days, she said. Nathan looked at her for a moment. That same quality of attention she was coming to understand was not evaluation, but something more specific, something that had to do with seeing a person clearly and not flinching from what you saw. Then he said very quietly, I know you have. And then Harlan Briggs's voice came from the yard. Not Pete Doyle this time, not an unknown rider. Harlan himself, loud and deliberate, with the voice of someone who had made a decision and was committed to it. Walker, I know the sheriff is up here. Tom Haskell, I know you're in that house. I want to talk to everyone together, and I want to talk right now, and it would be better for all concerned if we do this before things get out of hand. The kitchen went absolutely still. Haskell's hand went to his badge, not his gun. A deliberate choice. The choice of a man reminding himself of what he was. He looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the ledger on the table and the 4 original pages beside it. She picked up the pages. She folded them back into their careful small squares. She put them into the sheriff's coat pocket, not her own, and she held Haskell's eyes while she did it. Don't give those to anyone, she said, regardless of what happens in the next few minutes. Those pages go to the federal examiner and nowhere else. Haskell covered her hand with his for one brief second. You have my word, he said. She nodded. She looked at Nathan. She looked at Robert still in the doorway, and she saw in his face the residue of 14 months of fear and the very new and fragile thing that was growing over the top of it. Not courage exactly. Not yet. But the decision to try courage, which was where courage always started. She looked at Clara and Eli against the wall. Clara met her eyes with a steadiness that should not have been possible in a 9-year-old, and yet absolutely was. Eli had his chin up. Evelyn turned toward the door. I'll go first, she said. Nathan's hand came out and calm, brief and certain, not stopping her. Just present for 1 second, like a hand at the small of your back that says, I am here, and you are not alone. She felt it all the way through. Then she opened the door and walked out into the cold morning to face Harlan Briggs. And for the first time in 14 months, she was not alone when she did it. And the difference between those two things, alone and not alone, was the whole difference between surviving something and living through it. Harlan was in the yard with 6 men behind him. 6. He had brought 6 men to 1 woman and 1 sheriff and a rancher and a frightened county recorder and 2 children and a ranch hand. And in that arithmetic, Evelyn read exactly how afraid he was. Afraid men made mistakes. She planted her feet in the frozen ground and looked at him. "Mrs. Carter," Harlan said. He was using his reasonable voice, the voice of a man managing a situation, but the 6 men behind him were the truth under the voice. "I think it's time we talked." "Then talk," Evelyn said. "I'm listening." He looked past her at Haskell, who had come out behind her. He looked at Nathan, who had come out on her other side. He looked at the door where Robert stood holding his ledger visible for the first time. Something moved across Harlan's face. Surprise. She had surprised him. He had expected to find a frightened woman and a sympathetic sheriff and a situation he could still manage, and instead he had found something that looked to anyone doing the same arithmetic he was doing, like a case he had already lost. "Robert," Harlan said. "Robert, let's be reasonable about this." "He has nothing to say to you," Evelyn said. Harlan's reasonable voice slipped slightly. "Mrs. Carter, you don't understand what you're standing in the middle of." "I understand it precisely," she said. 17 fraudulent transfers, $9,000 paid to Judge Aldrin Pace from the Ridge Meridian holding account. Benjamin Holt's signature on the commission designations that made those transfers possible. She said each piece slowly, the way you say something you have memorized and intend to say accurately. "I understand it to the dollar, and the date, and the document number." She held his eyes. "And in 4 days, a federal land examiner is going to be standing in this county with everything I just named." The yard was very quiet. One of the 6 men behind Harlan shifted his weight. Then another one. Evelyn watched the arithmetic move through them, watched the calculation of what they were being asked to stand in front of change in real time as the numbers stopped working. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. The reasonable voice was gone now. What was underneath it was something older and colder and considerably less managed. "You think a widow with no property and no standing can bring down a circuit court judge," he said. "I don't have to bring him down," Evelyn said. "I just have to make sure the right people have the right documents. The judge brings himself down." Harlan's jaw tightened. "Harlan." Tom Haskell's voice from beside Evelyn. Not loud, but carrying the full weight of 8 years of a sheriff's badge. "It's done. You need to understand that. Whatever you were planning to do here today, it's done." For 3 seconds, maybe 4, the yard held itself suspended. Evelyn did not move. She was aware of Nathan beside her with the same awareness she had of her own heartbeat, constant, present, foundational. She was aware of Clara and Eli at the window. She was aware of the ledger under Robert's arm and the pages in Haskell's coat pocket and everything. Those documents meant to the families who had lost land, and the man who had lost his barn, and the Finn boy who had gone to a corrupt judge with a righteous complaint and been turned away. She was aware that she was still standing. Harlan turned his horse. He did not say anything else. He turned, and the 6 men behind him turned with the specific movement of men who had recalculated and made a decision, and they went down the mountain road, and the sound of them faded, and the yard was quiet. Porter made a sound that was almost a laugh. Robert sat down on the porch step and put his head in his hands. Not from despair, from the specific physical relief of a man who has been braced for impact for so long that the absence of impact is almost its own shock. Haskell looked at Evelyn. "He's not finished," the sheriff said. "No," Evelyn agreed. "But neither are we." Nathan said nothing. He was looking at the road where Harlan had gone, and his face had the look of a man adding things up, and whatever total he arrived at, he kept it to himself. But he turned after a moment and looked at Evelyn, and in his eyes was something she had been reading in pieces for 3 days now, and was finally standing in the cold morning yard with the whole county's future hanging on 4 folded pages, beginning to understand all the way. Clara appeared in the doorway behind Robert. She looked at the empty road. She looked at Evelyn. She said with the perfect composure of a 9-year-old who had been waiting for the outcome of a thing she had already decided. "Good. Now someone needs to fix that fence post." Eli from somewhere inside laughed, sudden and genuine and young, and it broke the tension of the yard, the way a stone breaks ice, cleanly releasing everything underneath. Evelyn put her face toward the mountain for a moment, breathed the cold air. She thought 4 days. She thought hold. She thought this is what it feels like to not be alone. And underneath all of it, quiet as a creek running under winter ice, something that had been gone for 14 months was coming back. Not hope yet. Not safety. Not anything she could name cleanly. Just the sense that the ground she was standing on was hers, and she was going to stand on it, and there were people standing on it beside her. That was enough for right now. Standing in the yard with Harlan Briggs going down the mountain, and 4 days between her and the end of this, it was enough. But Evelyn Carter had survived long enough to know that enough in situations like this one had a way of expiring without warning. The first day passed in the particular tension of waiting, the kind where every sound from the road made Porter look up, and every silence felt like it was holding its breath. Tom Haskell had gone back to town before noon, taking the authenticated copies Robert had made, and the original 4 pages tucked against his chest, inside his coat. He had shaken Evelyn's hand when he left, not as a pleasantry, but as a commitment. The kind of handshake that means I understand what I'm carrying, and I will not put it down. Robert stayed. He had nowhere else to go, and the ledger needed to stay with witnesses, and Evelyn thought, though she did not say this to him because he was still fragile in the way of someone who had recently decided to stop running and had not yet built up new muscle in its place, that being around Clara and Eli was doing him good. Clara had a gift for treating frightened adults the same way she treated the horses, which was to say, with brisk and uncondescending competence, assigning them small tasks and expecting them to be completed, and Robert responded to it the way the horses responded to it, which was by gradually standing a little straighter. Nathan spent the first day doing ranch work, which Evelyn initially misread as avoidance, before she understood it was the opposite. He was a man who thought through his hands. He processed things while he worked, and the work itself was its own kind of steadiness, a signal to Porter and to the twins and to anyone watching from the road that the Walker Ranch was operating normally, that there was nothing here that looked like fear or siege. In the evening after supper, when Robert had gone to his room and the twins had gone to bed and Porter was in the bunkhouse, Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Evelyn without asking if she wanted it, which by now she had come to understand was how he offered things without preamble, without requiring acknowledgement. "Harlan will go to Pace," Nathan said. He sat down across from her. "Tonight or tomorrow morning. He has to. Pace is his protection and the only one who can make this stop." "And Pace will tell him to do whatever it takes," Evelyn said. "Pace is a man who has been careful for 11 years, Nathan said. "He didn't get into this arrangement because he's reckless. He got into it because he thought he could manage it indefinitely." He turned his cup slowly in his hands. "A federal examiner changes the calculation completely. A federal examiner is outside Pace's reach, outside this territory's reach. Pace can't fix a federal investigation the way he can fix a county proceeding." "So he becomes unpredictable," Evelyn said. "He becomes desperate, which is worse than unpredictable." Nathan looked at her directly. "He knows your name. He knows Robert is here. He knows what the evidence is." "You think he'll come himself?" "I think someone will come who isn't Harlan Briggs, yes." Nathan set down his cup. "I've written to 2 men in town, the mayor and the Methodist minister, asking them to be here the day after tomorrow when the federal examiner arrives. People whose presence makes things more complicated for anyone who wants to make things disappear quietly." "You've been planning this since you got back from Foreman's Crossing," Evelyn said. "I've been planning it since the night I walked through that crowd," he said simply. Evelyn looked at her coffee. "Why?" She looked up. "Before any of this, before you knew about the documents or the judge, you had no reason to walk through that crowd. You had no information. You just had 2 children running at a woman you'd never met." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I had enough information," he said. "What information?" "The rope," he said. "The 30 people who weren't stopping it." He paused. "My wife died 3 years ago, and I have watched my children try to make sense of a world that took their mother at 34 years old, and one of the things they landed on, both of them in their different ways, is that you don't walk past people who need someone to stop and stand with them. Clara said it to me once. She said, Daddy Mama always stopped. He looked at the fire. So when my children ran at a woman in a rope and called her family, I didn't need more information than that. Evelyn could not speak for a moment. Not because she was without words, but because the words that existed were not adequate. Your wife raised good children, she said finally. She did, Nathan said. And then she left me to finish the job which I am doing my level best at. He almost smiled. Some days better than others. You're doing well, Evelyn said. It came out more directly than she intended, and she did not walk it back. He looked at her. That same quality of seeing clearly and not flinching. You should try to sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be harder. He was right about that. The second day began with a wire. Denny brought it up the mountain before 7, a wire that had come into Miller's store for Tom Haskell forwarded to the ranch because Haskell had left instructions. Nathan read it first and then handed it to Evelyn without comment, which told her the contents before she read them. The federal examiner would be delayed. Not 4 days. 6. A matter in Helena required his presence before he could travel. He regretted the inconvenience and confirmed his intention to proceed. 6 days. 2 more than they'd planned for. Evelyn read the wire twice and set it on the table. Harlan will know the examiner is coming, she said. He may know already, Nathan said. My brother's wire to the examiner went through official channels. Pace has contacts in Helena. 2 extra days, Robert said from the doorway. He had heard. His face was doing the thing again, the fragile thing, the trying not to slip thing. 2 extra days is 2 extra days, Evelyn said because someone had to say something that was not a capitulation to panic. It changes the timeline, not the outcome. Robert looked at her with the expression of a man who wanted to believe that and was not yet all the way there. They could come for the ledger, he said. Harlan knows I have it. He knows what's in it. If they take it, they can't take what we've already sent, Nathan said. Tom Haskell has the originals. My brother in Helena has the copies. The wire to the examiner is already sent. He looked at Robert steadily. The ledger matters for your testimony. It matters for corroboration. But even if it were gone today, the case doesn't collapse. Robert was quiet. Then, they won't just come for the ledger. Nobody disagreed with that. The ledger was a pretext. Harlan coming back to this ranch with however many men he decided to bring would not be about the ledger. It would be about the witness. About Robert, who was the human connector between the documents and the courtroom. The man who had worked in that office and seen those transfers go through and could testify to what he had seen and known and done. Without Robert, the documents were powerful but incomplete. With Robert, they were a case. I need to get you out of this county, Evelyn said. Robert looked at her. Not because I want you to run, she said quickly. Because you are the testimony. The documents are the evidence, but you are the testimony, and testimony requires a living witness. She paused. We send you to Helena. You go to Nathan's brother directly. You bring the ledger. You give your statement to the federal examiner in Helena before he travels here. If I leave, if you stay, you are a man in a ranch house that Harlan Briggs knows the location of with 6 more days of exposure. She held his gaze. Robert, you did one brave thing when you gave me those papers. You did a second one when you came here. I need you to do one more. He looked at his hands. He looked at the ledger on the table. He looked at Clara, who had appeared from somewhere and was now sitting at the end of the table, eating an apple with absolute composure, and who looked back at him with the expression of someone who had already decided what he should do and was waiting for him to catch up. When? Robert asked. Today, Nathan said. Before noon. Porter will ride with you as far as Foreman's Crossing. From there you take the main road and you don't stop. Robert picked up the ledger. He held it. He nodded once short and certain the way a person nods when they have decided something with their whole self and there is nothing left to deliberate. All right, he said. Clara reached across the table and put her small hand briefly on top of Robert's. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She took her hand back and went back to her apple with the equanimity of someone who had delivered exactly the thing that was needed and considered the matter settled. Robert looked at the spot where her hand had been for a moment. Then he stood up and went to pack. Porter and Robert left at 10:30. Evelyn watched them go down the mountain road from the porch, and she held the feeling of the ledger leaving her vicinity, the physical sensation of a safety net being moved to a distance, the understanding that what remained on this mountain now was people and her memory and Nathan's judgment and a wire that was already sent and could not be unsent. Nathan came to stand beside her. "He'll make it," he said. "I know," she said. And she did know with more certainty than she could fully explain. Robert Carter had found something in the last 12 hours that had been missing for a long time, which was the sense that what he did mattered. Men who have found that don't stop halfway. They stood on the porch together for a moment, not speaking, and the mountain was doing what mountains do in the morning, which is to exist with a completeness that makes human problems feel their actual size, significant, but not cosmically so. "Nathan," Evelyn said. The night I arrived, you said your dog walked the hall and nosed at my door." He was quiet. "You don't have a dog," she said. He was quiet for a slightly longer time. "No," he said. "I don't." "Then it was you." "Yes." She looked at the road. "Why?" He turned his hat in his hands, which was the only fidgeting she had ever seen from him, and it was minimal. "Because you were a woman I'd brought to my house under circumstances that were, I didn't know what those circumstances were yet. I didn't know what you were carrying, or what kind of danger you were in, or what kind of person you were. And my children were in the house." He paused. "I checked the latch because I needed to know the latch was holding, and I needed to hear whether you were still there." Evelyn absorbed this. "You were afraid I'd leave in the night," she said. "Take whatever you thought I might be carrying and go." It was a possibility I had to account for. He looked at her. It stopped being a possibility about halfway through the first conversation. "But you checked the latch anyway." "Old habit." He paused. "I'm sorry. It wasn't something I'd want done to me." She thought about that for a moment. She thought about what it meant that he had stood outside her door in the dark, not to threaten or to intrude, but because he had brought a stranger into his children's home, and he was a man who checked, a man who verified, who did not take on faith what he could confirm. She found somewhat to her own surprise that she could not be angry about it. "I had a knife in my boot," she said. Nathan looked at her. "When I heard the footsteps, I sat up and got my knife," she said. "I held it until the footsteps left." He was quiet for a beat. "Good," he said finally. "Good. A woman alone in an unfamiliar house in a situation like yours, yes." He looked at her with that clear, unglamorized regard. "Good." They stood a moment longer, and then Eli called something from the barn about a horse with an opinion, and the morning resumed, and they both went back to work. Harlan came on the third night. Not with 6 men. Not with Pete Doyle or Cal Rourke. He came with one man, the same unknown rider, who had stood in the yard 2 days before the one whose specific employment did not get written in ledgers. And they came at 3 in the morning, which was the hour chosen by people who understand that 3 in the morning is its own weapon, that the body is slowest and the mind is least certain, and the distance between sleep and action is longest. What Harlan did not know was that Nathan Walker did not sleep past midnight when there was something to watch for. He had been up since one sitting in the main room with a rifle across his knees and a lamp turned very low, and he had heard them on the road a quarter-mile out because he had been listening for exactly that sound. He woke Evelyn with a knock so quiet it was barely a knock. She was at the door in 3 seconds. She had not fully undressed, and she had not fully slept. "2 of them," he said, very low, "coming to the back." The twins. Already moved Eli to Clara's room, the far side of the house. He handed her a rifle. "Do you know how to use this?" "My husband taught me," she said. He nodded and went back to the main room, and she took a position in the hallway where she could see the back door and the kitchen window. Both, and she held the rifle with the ease of someone who was not comfortable with it, but was competent, which is the only kind of comfort that matters at 3 in the morning with strangers outside your door. The back door rattled. Once hard testing the bar. Then nothing. Then the kitchen window. A hand against the glass, slow and deliberate, looking for a latch, finding none. Then, Harlan's voice low and direct, coming through the wall, as if walls were a formality. "Walker, I know you're up. Let's do this without anyone getting hurt. I just want the woman and the ledger, and then we're done." Nathan's voice came back equally level. "Tom Haskell knows you're here, Harlan. I sent Denny down the mountain 2 hours ago." A pause. "I don't believe you," Harlan said. "That's your choice," Nathan said. "It doesn't change what's true." Another pause. Longer. Evelyn stood in the hallway with the rifle and breathed slowly and listened to the specific silence of 2 men outside recalculating. "The ledger is already in Helena," she said. She said it clearly, loud enough to carry, and she said it to the window and the wall and the dark outside. Robert Carter gave his testimony to the federal examiner this morning. She had no way of knowing if this was true. Robert had been gone 24 hours, and she had heard nothing. But it might be true. And more importantly, Harlan did not know whether it was true. Another silence. "The examiner arrives in 3 days," she said. "Not 4, not 6, 3. Also possibly not true. Also something Harlan could not verify at 3 in the morning on a Montana mountainside. She heard the 2 men outside speaking to each other. Not words, the rhythm of speech urgent and compressed, 2 people rapidly deciding. Then footsteps moving away. Then, at a distance, hoofbeats. Then nothing. Nathan appeared in the hallway doorway. He looked at her, at the rifle at her face. "Did Denny actually go to town?" she asked. "No," he said. "I sent Denny to my neighbor McAllen's place an hour ago. McAllen has 4 sons, and they're all home." So if Harlan checked, he'd find 4 armed men who knew he was on the mountain. Nathan paused. "Which may be where he's going right now, to verify, which buys us until dawn." Evelyn let the rifle down. Her arms were shaking slightly, not from fear, from the sustained tension of holding still. She breathed. "And the part about Robert giving his testimony this morning," Nathan said. "I don't know if it's true," she said, "but it might be." He looked at her for a long moment. "You just bluffed Harlan Briggs off this mountain at 3 in the morning." "I stated possibilities," she said, "some of which may be facts." Something in Nathan's face shifted, the same warmth she had seen before. The same thing that had no clean name, and this time it did not disappear as quickly. "Come and sit down," he said. "I'll make coffee." "Nathan, it's 3 in the morning." "I'm aware," he said. "Do you have somewhere to be?" She laughed. It came out before she could stop it, short and genuine and surprised by itself, and it sounded strange in the dark hallway. Not because laughter was wrong there, but because she had not done it in so long that her own voice doing it was unexpected. He looked at her when she laughed. He looked at her with the particular attention of someone witnessing something they have been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting. And then he turned and went to the kitchen to make coffee, and she followed him, and they sat across from each other at the kitchen table in the low lamplight, and neither of them spoke for a while, and both of them were all right with that. 3 more days, she said finally. 3 more days, he agreed. And then it's over. He looked at his coffee. And then that part is over, he said. He looked up. What comes after it is a different question. She held his gaze. She understood what he was asking or not asking. Leaving open the way, he left things open without pressure, without the particular male habit of making a woman's future into a decision that needed to be made right now. I was simply acknowledging that there was an after, and that the after contained questions, and that he was aware of them. I haven't thought that far, she said. Which was not entirely true, but was true enough. You don't have to, he said. Not tonight. Not tonight. A small, specific mercy. She nodded, and they drank their coffee in the middle of the night with the mountain cold outside, and the fire low in the hearth, and the twins asleep safe in the far room. And it was not comfortable exactly, because nothing about their situation was comfortable, but it was something. Something she had almost forgotten the feel of. 2 people in a warm room, both of them telling the truth, neither of them alone. Chai. Tom Haskell arrived at 7 the next morning, with news that remade everything. He came up the mountain road in a hurry, and his face when he came through the door was the face of a man who had spent a sleepless night and had something he needed to put down. "Pace has resigned," he said. The kitchen went still. "Last night," Haskell said. "He submitted his resignation to the territorial court and left his house before dawn. His clerk found the letter this morning." He sat down heavily. "He's gone. Nobody knows where." Nathan was very still. "He knew," Evelyn said. "He knew the examiner was coming," Haskell said. "Someone in Helena warned him. He made the calculation that being gone was better than being present." He put his hands on the table. "Which means he's running, and a running man can be found, and when he's found, he has no position left to protect him." "And Harlan?" Nathan asked. "Harlan Briggs was at the county line at first light this morning," Haskell said. "Checkpoint man at the eastern road saw him go through with 2 horses and bags." He paused. "Cal Rourke is still in town. He came to my office this morning before I got the news about Pace." Another pause. "Cal wants to cooperate." The word landed in the kitchen with the specific weight of a word that changes the shape of everything around it. "Cooperate," Evelyn said. "He says he knew about the land transfers. He says Harlan brought him in 2 years ago, told him it was legitimate business, and that by the time he understood, it wasn't he was in deep enough that he didn't see a way out." Haskell's voice was even delivering facts without editorializing. "He's willing to give a full statement. He says he knows where Harlan keeps records that we don't have yet." Evelyn looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Evelyn. "Benjamin Holt," she said. "Still in Helena," Haskell said. "The commission met yesterday. He doesn't know the examiner has been rerouted or that Pace is gone yet. He's going to find out today, but—" He stopped. He looked at her with the expression of a man about to say the thing he came to say. "The federal marshal's office sent a wire this morning. They've been watching Benjamin Holt for 6 weeks. They have their own evidence. They've been waiting for a local source to corroborate." He looked at the spot on the table where the ledger had been. "Robert Carter's testimony was enough. They moved this morning." The room breathed. "It's done," Nathan said. Not a question. He was checking the edges of the word, making sure it held. "It's not finished," Haskell said carefully. "But the part that required—" He looked at Evelyn. "The part that required a woman to carry forged documents sewn into her coat for 6 weeks while being called a thief and a troublemaker. That part." He stopped. His jaw moved. "That part is done." Evelyn put both hands flat on the table. She looked at them, her hands red at the knuckles from cold, and worked the wrists still faintly marked from the rope that had been on them less than a week ago, though it felt like a different life entirely. She looked at them and breathed slowly and let the information settle into her, the way water settles into ground, not all at once, but pervasively getting into every dry place. She heard Clara's voice from the hallway asking Eli something about the fence post. Still the fence post. She heard Eli's response, dismissive in the easy way of a brother who will fix the fence post in his own time and resents being managed about it. She heard the ordinary sound of an ordinary morning in a house where children were alive and safe and arguing about woodworking, and she sat at the kitchen table and let that be the thing that finally cracked her. Not the fear, not the rope, not the 6 weeks alone, the fence post. She pressed her fingers over her eyes for a moment, and she did not make a sound, because that was not her way. But her shoulders shook briefly, and Nathan, who was sitting across from her, said nothing and did not look away, which was exactly the right thing to do. Haskell looked at the window with the tact of a man who had daughters. She took her hands from her face. She was not embarrassed. She was done, or close enough to done that she could see it, and that was a thing worth a moment of uncomplicated feeling. "Cal Rourke," she said. Her voice was steady. "He needs to understand that cooperation now doesn't undo what he was part of. The families who lost land." "The land is the subject of the federal case," Haskell said. "Restitution is part of what's being examined." "The Finn boy. I'll go see him today," Haskell said. "First thing after I leave here." Evelyn nodded. "Good." She looked at Nathan. "Your neighbor McAllen and his sons, they should know they can stand down." "I'll ride over this morning," Nathan said. She thought about Danny, who had carried messages up and down this mountain all week, with his hands in his pockets and his hat pulled low. She thought about Porter, who had stood at the kitchen window and said, "I didn't do anything that night," and had spent 3 days making it true in the only way available to him, which was to do something now. She thought about all the small and specific acts of ordinary people that had built the scaffold that held all of this up, and she thought that if she tried to say something adequate about that, she would not manage it. So instead she said, "Tom, will you stay for breakfast?" Haskell looked slightly surprised. Then he looked at the stove, and at the coffee, and at the kitchen, which had the morning smell of a house where children live. "I'd be grateful," he said. Clara appeared in the doorway with the timing of someone who had been listening for her cue. She took in the sheriff's presence and Nathan's expression and Evelyn's face in that order, with the comprehensive speed of a 9-year-old who had learned to read rooms out of necessity. "Good news," she said. "Very good news," Evelyn said. Clara nodded once with the bearing of someone who had expected this outcome all along. "Eli," she called back toward the hall. "Set the table. We have company for breakfast." Eli appeared behind her, already holding plates, which meant he had also been listening and had moved faster on the logistics. He set the table without being asked twice, and the plates went down and the cups went down, and Haskell took off his hat and hung it on the peg, like a man who intended to be present for a meal rather than a meeting. And Nathan stood at the stove and made eggs, because he was a man who did the thing that needed doing. And Evelyn sat at the table in the middle of all of it, and felt the shape of it. This specific morning, this specific kitchen, these specific people. It was not the life she had planned. It was not anything she had known to want before wanting it in the abstract way you want warmth when you cannot remember having been warm. But it was real. Every piece of it was real. The plates on the table, and the smell of eggs, and the twins' elbows on the table that Clara had told Eli 3 times to remove, and the sheriff's hat on the peg, and Nathan's voice saying something to Eli about the eggs that made Eli laugh. Real in the way that things you choose are more real than things that simply happen to you. Later after breakfast, when Haskell had gone, and Porter had come in and been told the news and received it with the slow, deep nod of a man replacing something heavy with something lighter. After all of that, Evelyn found herself on the porch for a moment alone, looking at the road that went down the mountain toward Black Pine. She thought about the woman who had been dragged down that road with a rope. She thought about Evelyn Carter, standing in the cold mud, thinking no one will speak, and being right, and it not being the end of the story. She thought about what Clara had said the first morning. "He's not sad the same way this morning." She thought about what Nathan had said last night. That part is a different question. She put her hand against the porch post and felt the solid grain of it under her palm. A house that had held a family through grief and winter and the particular daily difficulty of living. Still standing. Still warm inside. She did not know yet what she would decide about the after. About where she would go and what she would do and what the shape of the next part of her life would be. She was a widow with no property, and until last week no standing, and those facts did not disappear because a judge had resigned and a fraudster had run. The world did not automatically give back what it had taken, but she was also a woman who had memorized 4 pages of forged documents in a boarding house room and carried them 6 weeks sewn into her hem and stood in front of Harlan Briggs with no support but her own voice and spoken names that could have gotten her killed. She was also a woman that 2 children had run through a crowd for in the dark, calling her family without knowing anything about her, except that she needed someone to run. She was also, she thought, and this was new. This was the newest thing, still tender around the edges. She was also a woman that a man had made coffee for at 3 in the morning and sat across from in the lamplight, and not pressed and not pushed and not required to be anything other than what she was in that specific moment. The mountain was doing its morning thing. The cold was specific and clean. Evelyn Carter stood on the porch and looked at the road and understood with the clarity that sometimes comes on the other side of long fear that she was not the woman they had tried to erase. She had never been that woman. She had only been for a time surrounded by people who needed her to be nothing so that they could take everything. She wasn't surrounded by those people anymore. The door opened behind her, and Clara came out with a cup of coffee held in both hands, offered with the direct simplicity of someone who does things because they need doing. "You looked like you needed this," Clara said. Evelyn took the cup. "Thank you." Clara stood beside her and looked at the road. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. Not plaintively, practically. Gathering information. Evelyn looked at the mountain, at the road, at the cup in her hands. "I think," she said carefully, "that I might like to see what spring looks like up here." Clara absorbed this. She nodded once. "It's good," she said. "The pasture goes green fast. Daddy says it's the elevation." She turned and went back inside, matter of fact, as if the question had been minor and the answer satisfying, and there was nothing more to say. Which Evelyn thought, holding her coffee in the cold morning air, was just about right, and she had learned in the hardest possible way that just about right was not a small thing. It was, in fact, everything. Part 5. The woman they abandoned became the woman they respected. Spring came to the Walker Ranch. The way Clara had promised, fast and green, and without apology, the mountain pasture going from frost gray to living color in the span of 2 weeks, as if the land had been holding its breath all winter and finally decided to exhale. Evelyn had stayed to see it. And then she had stayed past it, because by the time the pasture went green, she had already become, in the particular quiet way that real things happen, something the ranch could not easily do without. She had not planned it that way. She had not planned anything, which was itself a new experience for a woman who had survived 14 months of crisis through planning and nothing else. But the federal examiner had come and gone, and Robert had given his testimony and returned to Black Pine with the specific dignity of a man who had done the last right thing and been recognized for it. And Harlan Briggs had been located in Wyoming 3 weeks after he fled and brought back in the custody of a federal marshal. And Benjamin Holt had resigned from the Territorial Commission and hired the most expensive lawyer in Helena, which was, Nathan said, the action of a man who knew exactly what he had done. Judge Aldrin Pace had been found in Oregon in a boarding house in Portland, looking like a man who had been running from himself rather than from the law, which is always the more exhausting pursuit. He was extradited. He did not fight it. Cal Rourke had cooperated fully. The families who had lost land, the Finboy, the 2 homesteaders from the North Road. 3 others that the federal examination uncovered were entered into a restitution process that would take time and would not give back every lost year, but would give back the land. And sometimes that had to be enough. Mrs. Donahue had come up the mountain in April on foot, which at her age was a statement of intention rather than simply a means of travel. She had knocked on the Walker door, and when Evelyn answered it, she had stood on the porch with her hands folded and said without preamble, "I signed that complaint because Harlan Briggs told me he would burn my building down if I didn't, and I have been sick about it since the night I did it, and I am here to say so to your face because you deserve to hear it that way." Evelyn had brought her inside and fed her lunch, and they had talked for 2 hours, and when Mrs. Donahue left, she walked back down the mountain lighter than she had walked up it. That was April. Now it was May, and the town of Black Pine was doing what towns do after a thing like this, the slow and unglamorous work of reassembling itself around a new understanding of what had happened and who had been what. It was not a clean process. It was not, Evelyn had decided, supposed to be clean. A town that could tidy up that quickly was a town that had not actually reckoned with anything, just rearranged the furniture of its conscience. But it was happening. That was the real thing. What was also happening, and this was the thing Evelyn had been turning over in her mind like a stone in her palm, feeling its weight, examining its edges, was Nathan Walker. Not dramatically. Not with speeches or declarations, which would not have been his way and would not have suited either of them. It was happening the way it happens between 2 people who have been through something together that stripped away the usual slow courtship of pretense. The way it happens when you've already seen a person in their truest moments, before you've had the chance to present yourself as anything other than true. He had asked her in March whether she would stay on through spring and help him manage the household accounts, which had gotten away from him over the winter. She had said yes because the accounts genuinely needed managing, and because she was not yet ready to figure out where else she would go. In April, he had asked whether she knew anything about kitchen gardens, because Clara wanted one, and he had neither the knowledge nor he admitted the patience for it. She did know, and the garden was now 12 feet of turned earth behind the house, with Clara supervising it with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. In May, he had not asked anything directly, but he had started sitting on the porch in the evenings after supper, and he had not sat there alone, because Evelyn was usually already there, and neither of them had arranged this, and neither of them was pretending not to notice it. It was a Tuesday evening in the second week of May, when Nathan finally said the thing he had been not saying for 2 months. They were on the porch. The twins were inside. Clara reading Eli doing something with rope, because Eli was always doing something with rope. The mountain was going through its evening ritual of turning the light gold, and then pink, and then the specific blue that comes just before dark. And Evelyn had her coffee, and Nathan had his, and they had been sitting in comfortable silence for 20 minutes. "I want to say something," Nathan said, "and I want to say it plainly, because I think you deserve plain more than you deserve careful." Evelyn looked at him. "All right, I would like you to stay," he said. "Not to manage the accounts, not because of the garden, not because the twins have decided the matter for both of us, which they have if you've noticed." He paused. He was looking at his coffee, and then he looked at her. "I would like you to stay, because this house is better with you in it, and because I have not felt like the best version of myself since Margaret died, and when I am around you, I do." He paused again. "That's the plain version." Evelyn was quiet. She looked at her coffee. She looked at the mountain doing its blue thing. She thought about Thomas the way she thought about Thomas, not as a wound anymore, but as a room in her heart that would always be his and would not be given to anyone else, which was not an obstacle to loving someone new. It was just the shape of a person who had loved someone and lost him. "You carried the room. You did not barricade the house." "Nathan," she said, "I need to tell you something I haven't told you." He waited. He was very good at waiting. "When I came here when your children brought me here, I had been alone for 14 months, and I had been afraid for 6 of them, and I had lost everything that belonged to my previous life. I had no home and no money and no standing and a rope on my wrists." She looked at him. "I am not telling you that to ask for pity. I am telling you because you need to understand that I came here with nothing and everything I have found here. The safety, the warmth, the children. You I cannot always tell even now whether I want it because it is right, or because I was cold for such a long time that any fire feels like the only fire in the world." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "That's a fair thing to say," he said. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am saying that I want to be honest with you about the complexity of it, because you have been honest with me about everything else, and you deserve the same." He looked at her steadily. "Do you trust your own judgment?" "Usually," she said. "Then trust it now," he said. "Not about me, about yourself." He set down his coffee. "You are not a woman who mistakes fire for sun because she's been cold. You are the most clear-eyed person I have met in my adult life, and I have watched you operate under conditions that would have broken clearer-eyed people than me." He paused. "So if you're uncertain, I will wait. There is no urgency here that isn't manufactured. But I want you to be uncertain because you're uncertain, not because you've decided you owe it to some version of caution to pretend." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. "You're very annoying to argue with," she said. Something happened in his face. Not quite a smile, something warmer and less controlled than his usual expression. "So I've been told." "By who?" "Clara mostly." Evelyn laughed. Again the same surprised sound, the laugh she kept discovering she still had. "Clara is right about most things." "She is," Nathan agreed. "It's fairly humbling." They sat for a moment in the new quality of the silence, which was different from all the previous silences, lighter, like something had been put down. "I would like to stay," Evelyn said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. I have places I could go. Robert has offered, and Mrs. Donahue has offered, and I have enough now for my own start somewhere if I choose it." She looked at him. "I would like to stay because this is where I want to be. And I believe that's the honest version." Nathan picked up his coffee. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Good," he said. And that was all because it was enough, and he was not a man who decorated sufficient things with excess. Inside, Clara's voice said to Eli, "I told you," at a volume that made it entirely clear she had been listening, and Eli said, "You don't know everything." And Clara said, "I know this." And then there was the sound of someone being hit with what was probably a book, and then laughter, and Nathan and Evelyn both looked at the door with the identical expression of two people trying not to smile. The letter from Black Pine came on a Thursday. It was signed by the mayor, and by 6 other names Evelyn recognized men and women of the town. People who had stood in the street that night, or had not stood there because they had not come out, which amounted to the same thing. The letter was formal, and it was careful, and it was in its careful formality as close to an apology as a town knows how to write. It said that the county had been the site of significant fraud. It said that individuals who had been harmed by that fraud were being identified and addressed through the federal process. It said that the role Evelyn Carter had played in bringing the fraud to light was significant and acknowledged. It said that her name had been formally cleared of all complaints previously filed against her, including the complaint filed by Harlan Briggs, which had been determined to be fabricated. It did not say we tied a rope around your wrists. It did not say 30 of us stood there and let it happen. It did not say we called you cursed and troublemaker and burden, and we were using those words to cover our own failure to look at what was actually happening. It did not say those things because letters from towns do not say those things. But Evelyn read what it did say, and she understood what was underneath it, and she made a decision about what to do with the space between the two. She wrote back. Her letter was shorter than theirs. She thanked them for the communication. She confirmed her intention to remain in the county as a resident of the Walker Ranch. She said that she believed the families who had lost property deserved not only legal restitution, but the sustained attention of their neighbors in the recovery process. And she listed 3 specific families by name and suggested 3 specific things the town could do for each one, because Evelyn Carter did not write letters that were only about feelings when there were also things to be done. She did not write, "I forgive you." She had thought about whether to write it sitting with the letter in her lap for a long time, and she had decided that forgiveness was something she would carry in her own heart, in her own time, and was not something owed to a town as a performance of her own graciousness. The families who had lost their land had not yet gotten it back. The Finn boy had not yet stood on his father's 160 acres and called it his. Forgiveness was a thing for after the restitution, after the rebuilding, after the people who had been damaged had been given the chance to decide for themselves what they wanted to do with what had happened to them. She sealed the letter and gave it to Denny, who was still running messages up and down the mountain with his hat low and his hands in his pockets, and who had at some point become a fixture of the Walker household in the specific way of useful young men who have found a place where they're valued. Nathan read her letter before it went. He read it without comment, and then he folded it and handed it back and said, "Right," which was from Nathan, a full endorsement. In June, Evelyn went to town. She went with Nathan because she chose to not, because she needed an escort. She had established that distinction clearly, and he had accepted it without argument, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate most about him. He drove the wagon, and she sat beside him, and the road down the mountain was the same road she had walked up it 2 nights in the dark twice, once being dragged and once choosing. And it looked different in June with the sun on it, and green on both sides, and the distance to town being a distance she was covering by choice. They went to the feed store first because the ranch needed supplies, and Pete Doyle was behind the counter. Pete saw her come in. He went still for a moment, the stillness of a man who has been hoping for and dreading a particular encounter, and is now in the middle of it before he's finished deciding how to be. He was not a bad man. She had always believed that about him, even when he was one of the men walking her down the road in the dark. "Mrs. Carter," he said. His voice was careful. "Mr. Doyle," she said. She handed him Nathan's supply list. "We need everything on that." He took the list. He looked at it. He said, still looking at it, "I'm sorry for my part in what happened to you." The store was not empty. 2 other customers were there, and both of them were listening with the focused inattention of people who were doing no such thing. "I know you are," Evelyn said. "Fill the list when you can." She walked to the other end of the counter to look at a display of seed packets because she was building Clara's garden in her mind, even when she was not actively building it, and she let Pete Doyle stand with his apology received and not dramatized, which was, she had decided, the most useful thing she could do with it. Nathan behind her was examining a length of rope. Eli would be disappointed that he hadn't come. They went to Mrs. Donahue's next, because Evelyn wanted to, and Mrs. Donahue had coffee waiting before they were fully through the door, which meant she had seen them coming from her window and had started the pot immediately. They sat in the front room of the boarding house, and Evelyn looked at the chair she had sat in every evening for 11 weeks mending by the lamp, and felt for it the clean feeling of a place that had been hard and was now simply past. "How are you?" Mrs. Donahue asked, looking at her with the direct attention of a woman who asked questions she intended to have answered. "I am well," Evelyn said, and meant it, not as a pleasantry, as a fact. Mrs. Donahue looked at her for a long moment, the way an older woman looks at a younger one when she is assessing something more than the surface of the answer. Then she nodded satisfied and poured more coffee, and the conversation moved to the garden and the twins and the restitution proceedings, because there was genuine news to discuss, and life did not pause for reflection when reflection was finished. On the way out of this boarding house, on the wooden sidewalk in the middle of Black Pines Main Street, Evelyn stopped. It was not a planned stop. She did not decide to stop, she simply stopped. The way you stop sometimes when something resolves and your body knows it before your mind articulates it. She was standing on the street where they had put a rope on her. Standing on it by choice in June's sunlight with Nathan beside her, and the feed store behind her, and Mrs. Donahue's curtain moving in the window as the woman watched from inside. She was standing on it with her name cleared and her testimony on record, with a federal court and 3 families on their way to getting their land back, and a kitchen garden on a mountain, and 2 children who called her family, and a man who had told her plainly that this house was better with her in it. She thought about Harlan Briggs, who was in federal custody and whose reasonable voice and managed contempt would not again organize itself into a threat against anyone in this county. She thought about Aldrin Pace in his Portland boarding house, looking like a man running from himself, which she almost pitied him for the way you almost pity a person who has manufactured their own cage out of material that was never worth the labor. She thought about the 30 people in this street who had watched in silence, and she did not hate them. She had turned this over many times looking for hatred, and had not found it, which surprised her less than it once might have. Hatred required ongoing attention that she had better uses for. What she felt standing in the June street of Black Pine was something quieter and more total than any of the dramatic emotions she might have expected. She felt simply that she was still here. After everything that had been done to remove her, the rope and the road, and the false complaints, and the night visitors, and the 6 weeks of fear in a boarding house room with documents sewn into her hem, she was still here. Standing in the street. In the sun. By choice. They had tried to erase her. They had used every tool available, reputation, community, pressure, legal fabrication, physical force, and she was standing in the sun. In the street they had dragged her through, and she had not been erased. Nathan said quietly, "You all right?" "Yes," she said. "I'm just finishing something." I understood that. He was a man who understood when a thing needed to be finished internally before it could be set down externally, and he waited without requiring explanation. Which was, she thought. Looking at him standing there in the June sun, with his hat on, and his patience absolute, one of the things about him she had not yet fully accounted for. The patience. The quality of attention that did not demand to be fed. "Finished," she said. They walked back to the wagon. Joe. Robert came in July with his wife, which was itself the resolution of a separate story that Evelyn did not know all the details of and did not ask for, because Robert's wife was a frightened woman who had made frightened choices and was now trying to make different ones, and that was a private process that deserved private space. Robert looked like himself again, like the man Evelyn had known before. The fear had hollowed him before the choice between right and wrong had become so freighted with danger that he had nearly been crushed by the weight of it. He sat at the Walker kitchen table and ate Clara's biscuits and told Nathan about his new position. He had been reinstated as county recorder, this time with a federal audit process in place that made the kind of corruption that had flourished before structurally nearly impossible. "They offered me a commendation," Robert said. He sounded faintly baffled by this. "You earned it," Evelyn said. "I waited too long," he said. "You didn't wait forever," she said. "That's the part that matters." Robert looked at his biscuit. He looked at his wife, who was having a careful and somewhat stilted conversation with Clara about the merits of different approaches to piecework. Clara having opinions about piecework that she had not yet shared with Evelyn, and that Evelyn was noting for future discussion. He looked at Nathan. He looked at the kitchen, the house, the evidence of ordinary life continuing inside a story that had for a while felt like it might not allow for ordinary life. "I'm glad you found this," he said to Evelyn. "I'm glad this is where you landed." She looked around this kitchen. At the table she had sat at in the middle of the night with a rifle and her own fear and a cup of coffee, and one man who had not needed her to be anything other than exactly what she was. At the stove where Clara had made biscuits and said her mother taught her, and delivered a piece of wisdom she probably didn't know was wisdom. At the window where Porter had knocked with his face wrong and changed the course of mornings twice. At the door she had walked through on her first night with her wrists marked from a rope and nothing left, and found on the other side of the threshold warmth. "Yes," she said, "so am I." The rest of July moved in the way of good months, full and ordinary, and not requiring anything dramatic from anyone. The kitchen garden that Clara was running produced its first real crop, which Clara received with the satisfaction of someone who had never doubted the outcome and was merely documenting the confirmation of known facts. Eli finished his fence post unremarked upon, but solid. Porter started teaching Denny how to manage the south pasture rotation, which Denny received with the focus of a young man who had recently understood that being useful was its own kind of power. Nathan repaired the roof on the south side of the barn, and Evelyn was on the ladder with him holding things, because she was not a woman who watched from the ground when there was work to do at elevation. On an evening in late July, Nathan's brother came from Helena. He was a compact and precise man who wore city clothes with the self-consciousness of someone who had grown up in the country and was still reconciling the two, and he shook Evelyn's hand when he arrived with the specific grip of someone who has heard a great deal about a person and is checking their impression against the reality. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. "Everyone says that," Evelyn said. "I expected someone." He searched for the word. "Larger," Nathan said with the tone of a man who has had this conversation with his brother before and knows where it goes. "More formidable," Evelyn offered. "Yes," Nathan's brother said. "I'm formidable in a different register," Evelyn said pleasantly, and went to put supper on, and Nathan's brother looked at Nathan, and Nathan had the expression of a man who was not going to say, "I told you," which was itself saying it. Supper was loud and long, and the twins had opinions about the Helena legal system that they delivered without being invited to, and Nathan's brother received them with the gracious shock of a man who had not previously spent significant time around Clara Walker's opinions. Evelyn sat at the table and ate and listened, and felt the room around her, its fullness, its noise, the particular warmth of too many people in a kitchen who are all there by choice. After supper, when Nathan's brother had gone to bed, and the twins had gone to their rooms, and the house had quieted, Nathan and Evelyn sat on the porch in the July warmth, which was different from all the previous porch sittings, because it was warm now instead of cold, which meant there was no practical reason to be inside, except preference, and they were both on the porch by preference, and knew it. "Your brother approves," Evelyn said. "My brother doesn't get a vote," Nathan said, "but he approves." "Yes," Nathan said, "he does." They sat. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said, "about what I want to do. Not about staying, that's decided, but about what I want to do here, what I want to contribute to." She turned her cup in her hands. 3 families are in restitution proceedings. The Finn boy will have his land back by fall if the process holds. But restitution proceedings are legal and slow, and the families are living in the gap between what was taken and what is being returned, and someone ought to be paying attention to what that gap costs them day to day. Nathan looked at her. "I want to do that," she said. "Not as charity, I don't have resources for charity. As advocacy. As someone who goes and sits with those families and understands what they need and says it to the people who have the capacity to respond." She paused. "I know how to document things. I know how to make a case. I know how to stand in front of people who would prefer I was not standing there and say the true thing clearly." She looked at him. "I want to use that." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You have a specific talent," he said, for understanding what a situation requires and then providing exactly that. "I've had a great deal of practice," she said. "Yes," he said. "And you're going to use it to help people who are in the gap between what was taken and what will be returned." "Yes." "Good," he said. Simply completely. The way he said things that he meant all the way through. She looked at the mountain. The dark shape of it against the slightly lighter dark of the July sky present, and enormous and indifferent in the way of mountains, which do not concern themselves with human trouble, but provide by their indifference a kind of perspective. She thought about the woman who had stood at the edge of town in the cold, with a rope on her wrists, thinking no one will speak for me, and being right, and not stopping because of it. She thought about the value of a person where it lives, how it survives, what it needs to come back after it has been denied and diminished and deliberately extinguished by people with the means to do damage. She thought it lives in here. It always lived in here. And the people who tried to take it could not reach the place where it actually was. She thought about Clara's hands on her wrists in the dark, certain and small and completely without hesitation. She thought, and it lives in that. In the choosing. In the people who run across a crowd in the dark because it is the only right thing to do, and they know it in their bones. "Nathan," she said. Thank you." He looked at her. "For what specifically?" "For asking what happened to her," she said, "instead of what she did." He was quiet for a moment. "You were worth the question," he said. "You were always worth the question." The mountain held its shape in the dark. The ranch was quiet. Inside somewhere, Eli was still awake. She could tell by the faint sound of movement the specific restlessness of a boy who had not yet learned that sleep was worth cooperating with. Clara was asleep, she was certain. Clara slept with the completeness of someone who had done everything she intended to do with the day and was satisfied. Evelyn Carter sat on the porch of the Walker Ranch in the July night, and she was not who they had said she was. Not cursed, not trouble, not a burden, not a woman to be erased. She was what she had always been, what they had never been able to actually remove, no matter how hard they had tried, because you cannot erase a person who knows their own value down to the bone. She had been surrounded by the wrong people. Now she was surrounded by the right ones. And that was the whole story, and it was enough, and it was hers.